Okay, good morning. Good morning to all of you gathered here, and good afternoon and good evening to everyone who is joining us online from faraway places like South Korea. My name is Sumi Terry. I'm the director of the Asia program and the Hyundai Motor Korea Foundation Center for Korean History and Public Policy at the Wilson Center. On behalf of the Wilson Center and our event partner and co-host, the Korean Association of International Studies, I would like to welcome all of you to the 2023 US-ROK Policy Forum, 70 years of the US-ROK Alliance, the past and the future. This is a milestone year for the US-ROK Alliance, and we have really assembled a stellar group of experts to analyze and explain where we have been and where we are going. But I think before we hear from them, I would like to first introduce Ambassador Mark Green, President and CEO of the Wilson Center, for his welcoming remarks. Just a brief bio of Ambassador Green. Before coming to the Wilson Center, Ambassador Green served from 2017 to 2020 as the administrator of the U.S. Agency for International Development. He has also served as the president of International Republican Institute, executive director of the McCain Institute, president of the Initiative for Global Development, senior director at the U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, and U.S. ambassador to Tanzania from mid-2007 to early 2009. Prior to that, he served 4 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Wisconsin's 8th district. Few people in public life have had the range and experiences and accomplishments that Ambassador Green has achieved, and we're lucky to have Ambassador Green leading the Wilson Center, and we're lucky to have him to kick off our conference today. Ambassador Green.
Thank you, Sue, for that overly generous introduction. Welcome to the Wilson Center, everyone gathered here and all those watching from Washington to Seoul. As many of you know, the Wilson Center is truly a unique institution in foreign policy. Chartered by Congress itself more than 5 decades ago, we're scholarship-driven, and we're fiercely independent and nonpartisan. And that special status, in my view, gives us a special obligation. We strive not to duplicate what others are doing, but instead to focus only on the most important and to find ways to add unique perspectives and value to the discussion, all of which makes this the perfect place for today's discussion. The U.S.-Korea friendship has always mattered, but I think we recognize probably today more than any time that we have known in a very long time. And so today we're gathered here in a forum organized in conjunction with our partner, the Korean Association of International Studies, CASE, to celebrate a landmark milestone, 70 years of the Korean-American Alliance. But we're not only celebrating history, we're also looking ahead. We're working to identify and assess the most important issues facing the alliance as President Biden prepares to welcome President Yoon to Washington next week. We're very proud to have CASE as our partner today. CASE was also founded many decades ago, and it's also a nonpartisan institution that promotes international relations and scholarship for South Korea. Together with CASE, we've been able to gather some of the top analysts and scholars on the US-ROK Alliance. They help us analyze and discuss some of the geostrategic concerns facing the two allies, from North Korea to the growing challenges of China and Russia to improving trilateral cooperation with Japan. Our speakers will also discuss important economic and trade issues such as safeguarding supply chains. Our time today will be successful. The scholars and analysts gathered here can help us chart a path forward for the alliance to make the next 70 years as successful as the previous 70 years have been. But before we get to our distinguished panelists, allow me to introduce President Park of the Korean Association of International Studies for his welcoming remarks. President Park is a professor in the Division of International Studies at Yuhua Women's University and serves as the 67th president of CASE. He has previously served in the Korean government, including as a member of the Advisory Committee of the Presidential Office of National Security and the Advisory Committee of the Ministry of Unification. President Park received his PhD from Northwestern University, so like me, he is a product of the Midwest and the Big Ten, and so I know for an absolute fact that everything he says will be smart and sensible. President Park, welcome. We look forward to hearing more of your Midwestern common sense.
Thank you, such a great introduction. I have never heard such a, kind and friendly introduction. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to all, especially to the President of the Wilson Center, Ambassador Mark Green, and also Special Assistant to the President at the NSC, Edward Kagan, and the distinguished scholars who represent Korea and US. I'm very grateful to be giving the remarks here today. Today, I stand here on behalf of the Korea Association of International Studies, the KAIS. Since the beginning, KAIS is the oldest and most prestigious academic society, covers national security and foreign affairs and regional studies and inter-Korean relations and etc. Under the assistance of the MOFA, ROK Minister of Foreign Affairs, I'm more than grateful to be part of the KAIS and Wilson Center's collaboration in holding the following meaningful event to celebrate the Alliance's 70 years history. Well, as you all understand, the US-ROK Alliance was signed in October 1953, and it has been known as the Korea's most valuable diplomatic and security asset, but also the alliance has symbolized the peace and democracy in the whole Asia from the perspective of the U.S. I believe that everyone attending today's ceremony is all aware of the significance of the alliance that has been in place for the past 70 years. I am certain that the meeting today will help all of us to reflect the past years and now to anticipate another new 70 years. Well, the best professionals representing Korea's academia and policy orientations have made their presence today, where I believe no additional introductions or explanation necessary. Former Ambassador Chun Young-woo, who accurately covers North Korean issues and served as the head of the six-party talks, and also Ambassador Chun served the senior presidential secretary for Foreign and Security Affairs during the Lee Myung-bak administration. And the Chancellor of the National Diplomatic Academy of Korea, Dr. Park Chul-hee, who is best known for his academic background regarding Korea-Japan-US relations and has taught a long time at SNU, Seoul National Universities. And Professor Jung Gu-yeon, Dr. Yeon Won-ho, and Professor Yeol Yu-kyung are not to be excluded from the list. Also, I would like to convey my sincere appreciation to our old friends, Professor Victor Cha and senior fellow Scott Snyder, and outstanding expert from the U.S. side for their participation and very thankful contribution. Excuse me. Leaving the 30 years history of globalization since the end of the Cold War behind us, the international order faced a series of unprecedented crises. We have once thought that the end of the Cold War and the fall of the communist bloc left no further challenges for human civilization, but unfortunately, the reality differed from our prediction. Terrorism, climate change, religious crisis, and gender issue, energy crisis all constitute the new challenges that the world has now come to front. As everyone here knows, the North Korean issue, is the midst of these challenges. The North Korea is immersed in developing a series of nuclear weapons, violating all the universal values and principles of the international community, which has resulted in more extreme economic poverty and more severe human rights violation on North Koreans. The North Korea issue is one of the problems that must be addressed and shall be addressed, and is also one of the reasons why we are here. For today's conference, it is not enough to express my greatest thanks. Thank you to Dr. Sumi Terry. Can you hear that? Okay, yeah. Of the Wilson Center, and there are other members that I have to deliver my thank you. While even though he's not available today, Dr. Woo Jung-yeop from Korea MOFA has put his best effort for today's event to take place. And also Dr. Kim Min-sung, she has been in charge of the conference from the very beginning of the stage by meticulously taking care of the all aspect of the event. I wish that I will have another opportunity to express my gratitude for everyone's endeavor. Finally, I have no doubt that today's conference will call for a fresh commencement of the endless friendship between the two countries by bringing together the brilliant insight of the two countries' leading scholars. Okay, once again, thank you very much.
Okay. Great. So thanks to Ambassador Green and President Park In-hee for their remarks. I would like to now ask the newest Chancellor of the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, Chancellor Park Cheol-hee, to provide congratulatory remarks. Chancellor Park, we just heard, is as well very well-known academic and expert and friend to many of us here in Washington, D.C. He's a professor of Graduate School of International Studies at Seoul National University. He was also he served as a dean of GSIS, as well as director of the Institute for Japanese Studies at Seoul National University. He has taught and served as visiting professor at many well-known universities from US to Japan, from Columbia University to Keio to Kobe University. Dr. Park has also advised South Korean government in numerous capacities. He has advised the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Unification, and Ministry of Defense. He's a recipient of the first Nakasone Yasuhiro Award for his contribution to Korea-Japan relations. Prolific and brilliant writer and scholar, Chancellor Park, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Sumi, for such a nice introduction. Good morning, everybody. This is Cheol-hee Park. As she said, I'm the newly appointed Chancellor of Korea National Diplomatic Academy at Korean Foreign Ministry. Dear Ambassador Green, the CEO of the Wilson Center, Mr. Ed Kagan, Senior Director for East Asia and Oceania at the NSC, and Professor Park In-hee, the President of the Korean Association of International Studies, distinguished scholars, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very pleased and honored to deliver a congratulatory remark at a very timely and important forum at the Wilson Center. I'd like to express my special thanks to Ambassador Green and then Dr. Sumi Terry for hosting this event at the Wilson Center. This year marks the 70th anniversary of the US-ROK alliance. Since its inception, our alliance has worked as a pivotal pillar for maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, prosperity in East Asia and the Pacific, and the resilient democratic and liberal order in the region. Back in the 1950s, when our alliance started, Korea was a war-devastated country, and our lives in Korea were inevitably fraught with poverty, corruption, and authoritarian practices. However, over the past 7 decades, Korea has bounced back as a pivotal state with a democratic governance, an advanced economy, and drivers of a global soft power and culture. The United States has firmly stood by Korea's side all along with the continuing U.S. security presence, economic and technological assistance, and active human and intellectual exchanges. On this occasion, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to the American leaders and people for their sacrifice and dedication to making our alliance, particularly alliance and partnership, vital, resilient, reliable, and mostly enduring. We should also remember that the Korean people have made enormous efforts to make our country better. The Korean people fought for democracy and successfully established irreversible democratic governance. Korean business community and labor forces have worked hard to catch up with the advanced economies, elevating Korea's place to the world's 10th largest economy. K-pop and K-drama are sweeping the world as one of the most popular cultural items, as you see. All these achievements were possible because we made the right strategic choice to stand together against authoritarianism, illiberalism, and protectionism. The US-led international order after World War II has worked as a seedbed for making Korea a success story. There is no doubt that Korea is a living testament to the enduring power of the alliance and partnerships that US has nurtured over the past decades. As you all aware, President Yoon is going to visit Washington, D.C. very soon. This is the first state visit to the United States by a South Korean president in 12 years. This will be a historic moment as the two leaders will meet to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the US-ROK alliance. The theme of the visit will likely be an alliance in action toward the future. The Yoon government has made it clear that the United States and Korea will stand together to preserve and uphold the rules-based international order, and that we will work together with the like-minded countries to make the Indo-Pacific free, peaceful, and prosperous. Furthermore, Korea, as a global pivotal state, will spare no effort to contribute to international community's efforts in resolving various issues across multiple domains. I find the President Yoon's coming visit to the United States particularly meaningful as it comes after the normalization of Korea's long-standing the troubled relationship with Japan. Japan is not only a geographically close neighbor, but also an important strategic partner for Korea in the region. The Yoon government is fully aware of the importance of elevating the level of cooperation among the three countries. I hope we can take a major leap forward in information sharing and cybersecurity cooperation based on a strong trilateral ties. And Korea-Japan relations would further advance in the future through sincere and reciprocal trust-building measures. To open a new chapter for our alliance, the United States and Korea should design action-oriented plans to further strengthen extended deterrence and amid the ever-shifting Northeast Asian geopolitics. We must explore ways to redefine and coordinate our economic security policies through renewed trade rules, innovative technology, and aligned investment. All these efforts will gain further momentum if we significantly increase people-to-people exchanges, especially among our younger generations. So I sincerely hope we could learn a lot deal from each other at today's forum by engaging in insightful discussions. I myself will listen to the discussion very carefully. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chancellor Park Cheol-hee, for your congratulatory remarks. I would like to now introduce our special guest, Mr. Edgar Kagan, who will deliver his keynote address. Mr. Kagan is Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for East Asia and Oceania at the National Security Council. That makes him the lead White House official handling the US-ROK alliance, among many other important matters pertaining to Asia. Having had a stint myself at the National Security Council, I can certainly commiserate with Mr. Kagan for over what a difficult and demanding job he has, but he does it superbly. Foreign Service Officer since 1991. He previously served as a Deputy Chief of Mission in New Delhi, U.S. Consul General in Mumbai, Deputy Chief of Mission in Malaysia, Deputy Director of the U.S. Mission to the U.S. Washington office, and Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs. 1989 cum laude of Yale University, Mr. Kagan worked for New York City's Bureau of Bridges prior to joining the State Department. So I say he's in a very good position to build bridges between our two countries. We're grateful he could take time out of his very, very busy schedule to join us today. Edgar Kagan.
Thank you so much. It's such a great pleasure and an honor to be here. I will say, as always, I want to express my tremendous gratitude to Sumi for inviting me. And obviously, I want to thank Ambassador Green. And there's a whole lot of people here. I'm not going to run through the entire list. I will say that it is great to see some of my predecessors at the NSC who I think really appreciate the challenges that we're going through as we are in the final throes of preparing for a state visit. And I want to particularly note Allison Hooker, my immediate predecessor in this job, also Victor Cha. And I also want to just commend Ambassador Chun Yong-woo, who really has been a role model and someone from whom I have learned a tremendous amount. And I think for all of us who've had the pleasure of working with him over the years, his combination of patience, skill, and optimism, despite many reasons not to be optimistic, have been really, really inspiring. And so I also want to just say that where we are today is truly extraordinary. And I think if we're going to talk about the next 70 years, it's important to reflect on the last 70 years. In that regard, I want to commend the remarks. I feel like, Chancellor Park has sort of stolen some of my thunder because I was going to say some of the exact same things that he was. So I'm going to try and adjust. And I also want to thank President Park In-hwi for his remarks and the work that he's done and that Kais has done to help put this together. As I said, if you want to look at the next 70 years, it's important to reflect where we've come from. And as we've heard, 70 years ago, the idea that the ROK-U.S. alliance would still be a thing in 70 years was hard to imagine. The idea that the ROK would have the extraordinary success and the transformation that we've seen was unimaginable. I think when you look at things that people were writing and saying at the time, you don't detect a sense of optimism on this that is anywhere near what actually happened. And I think that we have to be humble about the fact that this was built on a number of really important things. One was the extraordinary shared sacrifice of Koreans and Americans who fought in the Korean War. And, anytime we want to talk about the US-ROK alliance, I think we have to start there because this is truly an alliance that was forged in blood and an alliance that was built on an extraordinary commitment and extraordinary sacrifice. I think it's also worth noting that it was built with a sense of trying to do several things at the same time. One, obviously, maintain peace and stability on the peninsula and in the region. And, when we look at it from today's perspective, it actually seems fairly straightforward. I think if you look back to 1953, there weren't a lot of people who thought that you would have the kind of peace and stability that you've had. Obviously, could it be better? Of course. But the reality is that the alliance has functioned extraordinarily well at doing what it was really designed to do, which was provide for peace and stability that then allowed the region to develop. And I think that has been an extraordinary success. And the truth is, it's not just a success for the ROK. And the ROK is one of the truly extraordinary economic success stories and political success stories of the last 70 years. But it's really had an incredible effect on the region. And if you want to identify what are the key drivers that have made East Asia, and I would argue the broader Indo-Pacific, critical to the global economy today, a key driver of growth around the world, and the place where we believe, and the administration believes, that the history of the 21st century will largely be written. In many ways, it does come back to the decisions that were made from 1950 to 1953. And I think that, there's a lot of other things that go into it. The incredible industriousness, the hard work of the Korean people, the commitment and the sustained commitment, the generosity of Americans, those were critical to this. But I think that where we are today is a function of a lot of other things as well. I think it's impossible when you look at this relationship and you look at the last 70 years not to recognize the extraordinary role of people-to-people ties. And I think for those of us in government, when we list our things, we list the things that matter as we're preparing for a state visit, preparing documents, often people-to-people is one of the last things on the list. But the truth is that when you look at this relationship, I genuinely believe that that was one of the core things that made the US-ROK relationship work and be as successful as it's been. I think we in the United States are deeply grateful to the Korean American community and the Koreans that have come to the United States. I think we're also grateful for the strong interest on the part of so many Americans in what happened in the ROK. And I think that when we look at where we're going to go, I think it is important to remember what got us here. And I would argue that and I want to thank Chancellor Park, what got us here to no small degree was people-to-people, and I really hope, and I would ask, and I would challenge all of you as people who are committed to the US-ROK relationship, as you think about what we do in the future and what you do, please work on people-to-people ties, how we can get more Koreans coming to the United States. The truth is we already have a lot. Korea is the third largest source of foreign students in the United States. There's a large Korean American community. Koreans go back and forth. But also, how do we get more Americans to go to Korea? How do we get more Americans to learn more about Korea and to recognize how important Korea is going to be to our future and to our economic prosperity? And I think that these are things that all of us should be working on. And that's not to take anything away from the other areas that people work on. There's a lot going on in the relationship. There are a lot of challenges. But I really believe that if we think about where do we get the most bang for the buck, where do we get the most yield, I would argue that people-to-people really is something that's critical. And I would ask all of you, as you're working on the various things that you work on, please focus on that. I think, the transformation that we've seen in Korea, the growth from, Korea in 1953, per capita income was $153 in the ROK. It was one of the world's poorest countries. Frankly, it was so low that it was difficult to measure. The idea that today it's $35,000 and on a purchasing power parity basis, it's $53,000, that's truly extraordinary. Korea's status as the 10th largest economy in the world is remarkable. And it has given Korea the ability to play a much greater role globally. And I think that Korea's ability to be an example of the linkage and the connection between economic prosperity and the development of democracy is really extraordinary. And at a time when around the world many people have doubts about democracy, have doubts about the ability of countries that freely choose their leaders and have accountable governance to be as effective in dealing with global challenges. I think that it is really inspiring as an American to look at Korea and to look at what the ROK has been able to do. And I think that that also has helped transform the relationship. So if we look at the last 70 years, one of the things that's really extraordinary is the fact of how differently we work together. As someone who came back to working on Korea issues after more or less a 10-year hiatus, one of the things that was really extraordinary was realizing how much the ROK had become a technology powerhouse and how so many areas of cutting-edge technology had become areas where the ROK was one of the strongest global players. And that has really transformed the relationship. I think that the areas that we've worked on, at least in this stint of working on Korea, have really been much more driven by technology and by the sense that we have to work together to strengthen our advances and our strengths in technology, but also to protect them. I think that is something that, look, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, that wasn't part of our discussion. And I think that, this is an area that, and look, I think we have to be honest, there are some points of friction. But there's also an extraordinary amount of agreement. And I think the degree to which Korean companies are choosing to invest in the United States, work with U.S. partners, American companies are investing in Korea, is a reflection of the fact that there is a deep understanding in the business community about the fact that we are better together and that we are much better looking at an ecosystem that is really based on our values and our sense of how the world should work. And, again, we're not going to agree on everything, and I think it is very important to recognize. And for those of us who have had the pleasure of working on alliances as well as relationships that are a little bit less close, one of the things that's really extraordinary about a truly close relationship and a true alliance is the degree to which you can be frank. And I would say, as someone who's worked with Korean counterparts over the last, longer than I care to think, 30 plus years, I'd say Koreans have never been reluctant to be frank and never been reluctant to be direct. But I think that the range of things that we discuss and the way we discuss them between our governments has changed dramatically because it is increasingly informed by confidence that we're going to be together. The question is how. Whereas there was a time, I think, when we were maybe a little bit more reluctant to have truly candid conversations because we weren't always sure that we would end up in the same place. Now, I think that across the board, when we engage with our Korean counterparts, when we have tough discussions, we know we're going to be together. The question is, how will we do it? How will we balance the competing interests? And to me, that's an extraordinary development. And I would say, as I said, I've learned a tremendous amount from watching and observing my Korean colleagues over the years. Ambassador Chun Yong-woo, as I said, also Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, when he was ambassador here, that was for me one of the gold standards of how to be an ambassador in the United States. And then our colleagues with whom we work now, Ambassador Cho Tae-yong, who's gone back to be the National Security Advisor, again, an extraordinary diplomat. And I would say that for those of us who've had the pleasure of working with these Korean colleagues, I think that we're dealing with world-class people who teach us. And I'm very, very glad that I've had that opportunity to learn. So look, we've got the state visit next week. Last year, I spoke at this right after the president came back from going to Korea. Frankly, it's always a little easier to talk afterwards than before. So I'm going to do my best to give you a sense of where we see the relationship going. I mean, first, I think it's noteworthy to just that this will be the second visit to each other's capitals. The president went to Seoul 10 days after President Yoon's inauguration last year. The presidents have seen each other a number of times. In addition to that visit, which was, we thought, extraordinarily productive, and I think got the presidents off on very good footing in terms of the personal relationship. I think that they saw each other at the NATO summit in Spain, where they also had a trilateral meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Kishida. They saw each other very briefly in New York in September, in the margins of the UN General Assembly. They had a long bilateral meeting, followed by a trilateral meeting in Phnom Penh in November. So they have had a number of exchanges, and I think that there is good chemistry, and I think there's good understanding. Now, the reality is that we've reached a point in the relationship where good chemistry between the leaders is valuable, but it's no longer essential. There was a time where bad chemistry between the leaders really, really hurt the relationship. But my view is, and I know this, it was very clear from the first day of the administration, President Biden is totally committed to a strong relationship, a close relationship, and a true partnership with the ROK. The administration recognizes both the strategic significance, but more broadly, the incredible value to the United States of working closely with a country which is such an example of the things that we believe in terms of adherence to a rules-based order, in terms of democracy, in terms of markets, in terms of global engagement. And so we welcome the changes that we've seen in the ROK over the last 70 years, and we're very confident that we're going to continue building out in the next 70. I think that, the key thing for us is that we have a growing number of things that we are working together on. So at one point, the relationship was primarily about the peninsula. It was security on the peninsula. Then it was about how we were able to strengthen our economic ties in a bilateral way. Increasingly, it has become global. And in that regard, we welcome the ROK's Indo-Pacific strategy. We welcome the way in which the ROK has chosen to up its game in terms of international engagement. And I think that we welcome the fact that in virtually every area that matters to the United States. We are working closely together with the ROK. I think it's also worth noting that this has happened in the context of also dealing with the challenges of the DPRK. And obviously, that has been a challenge from the very beginning. It's in many ways the basis of the alliance. But I think that the situation has evolved. But what has not changed is the fact that we work extraordinarily closely together. One, to maintain the peace. And I think that it's easy sometimes when we are at gatherings like this to forget the critical role of our militaries in maintaining the peace, the extraordinary integration of Combined Forces Command, the way in which we have created a remarkable alliance, which despite the fact that we continue to face challenges from the North, has been effective at deterring conflict. I think that it also is worth noting that in the last 2 years or 2+ years, it has been truly remarkable how closely aligned we have been with the ROK under 2 different administrations, as well as with Japan on DPRK issues. And I've got a number of my illustrious predecessors here. I think that they can all speak to the fact that it is very rare when you look at the US-ROK relationship and at how we deal with the DPRK that we have stayed as closely aligned for as long as we have. It's rare that you can look at a 2-year, 2.5-year period where there has been as common an approach, and particularly with Japan as well. And we believe this is extraordinarily important. Our goal is diplomacy with the DPRK. We believe that the challenges on the peninsula can only be resolved by direct diplomacy, and we've been consistent in calling for serious and sustained diplomacy with the North. Unfortunately, our efforts, and we've made many, to communicate directly, indirectly, privately, publicly, have gone without a response. This is not an accident, this is a decision. But as we have done this, we have done it in lockstep with the ROK. We've had extraordinary coordination with each other's efforts, and I think that that coordination has grown in recent months as it's become increasingly clear that the response to our efforts continues to be to ignore them completely. And so for us, this is really critical. We are going to remain committed to seeking engagement. It is the DPRK's decision not to respond. The actions it has taken, 100+ ballistic missile tests, each and every one of which is a violation of the UN Security Council resolutions, is clearly a signal, a statement, and a decision. And I think that for us, we want to continue working closely with the ROK as we deal with this, but also with Japan. And I think in that regard, we welcome the tremendous political courage and the difficult decisions that President Yoon undertook as he went to Japan, and as the agreement that has been worked out between Japan and the ROK. We believe this is very, very significant. We welcome the steps that Prime Minister Kishida and the Japanese government have taken, as well as obviously the great political courage shown by President Yoon. We believe it is very important for both sides to take all necessary steps to fully implement what has been agreed, but also to go beyond the immediate agreement, to restore the exchanges, to restore bilateral engagements, and to look for ways in which they can strengthen their partnership. Because for us, what we recognize is as much as we've made progress in recent years on trilateral cooperation, and I think that we really have. I mean, if you look at the trilateral joint statement that was issued following the meeting in Cambodia, what is remarkable about it is that, I mean, it wasn't that remarkable. And I would argue that if you looked at the beginning of, when Prime Minister Suga visited in April of 2021, when former President Moon Jae-in visited in May of 2021, if that trilateral statement had been done bilaterally with either of them, that would have been considered a very big deal. And the fact that now, in less than 2 years, it's gone to something that is sort of viewed as, hey, that's, there's nothing all that new here, that's truly extraordinary. And I think it reflects very hard work by our colleagues and friends in Seoul as well as in Tokyo. But that was before the progress we've seen now. And so for the U.S., this is huge. This is something that we believe is truly significant and that we have a very strong interest in supporting. I think that the hardest thing for us is to restrain ourselves from getting more involved. And I would say that we believe that if both countries take the appropriate steps to follow through on this, that the transformation of the relationship will have an extraordinary effect on the region and in advancing the common interests that we all share. Thinking about the state visit, but more importantly, thinking about where we're going to go after that. I think that we believe that this is about not just strengthening the alliance, it's not just modernizing the alliance, but it is about building on the shared values, building on the common interests, and building on the extraordinary growth of the relationship. And I think that we don't want to get into, I don't want to get into details. I shouldn't say we. You probably do want details, but I think that we want to make sure that we are taking every advantage of the opportunities that we have, that both sides are going to come out of this feeling that this has advanced the relationship significantly, and that both of us will have a stronger platform for dealing with the issues that we all have to deal with. And like I said, we truly believe we're more effective in the Indo-Pacific if we're working together with a strong and capable ROK. So I would say that the two other things that I would highlight. One is the depth and breadth of our cooperation in the Indo-Pacific and the similarity and alignment between our respective Indo-Pacific strategies. They're not identical. You wouldn't expect them to be. The ROK has different interests and has a different perspective. But at the same time, what is remarkable is how similar they are and how generally aligned they are. And I think that this offers a lot more opportunities to work together. And then also the degree to which we are working to further expand the economic integration between our countries, the investment going both directions. And really, for the U.S., and as I said, when I started this time around, what I was struck by was cutting-edge technologies in semiconductors, in electric vehicles, in batteries. The ROK has become one of the, if not the leading global player. And we are extraordinarily grateful for the partnership. We appreciate the ROK's, the tremendous vote of confidence in the United States by ROK companies that are choosing to invest here. We also appreciate the continuing role of U.S. investment in the ROK and the fact that American companies continue to see the ROK as a good place to do business and a place that gives them a platform for their operations, not just bilaterally with the ROK, but in the region. So I think that as we look to next week, I think you will see warmth. I think you will see a strong relationship between the leaders. I think you will see great alignment on issues. I think you will see expansion of things that we're doing in a variety of areas that are well afield of Northeast Asia. And I think that you will see the fact that we are building for another 70 years a relationship that's based on common values, shared interests, and a respect for the history and shared sacrifice that has brought us to where we are. So with that, I would like to thank all of you and to just say it is great to be here. And I want to also thank the Wilson Center. The work that you've done continues to inform what we do. I know that sometimes you're a little disappointed in us and think we could do a little bit better, but it's good to be pushed. And at the same time, I think that we're very proud of the work that has been done on this relationship. We believe that US-ROK relations are in the best shape ever. We believe that we have a tremendous platform for working together and that in both countries that there is an appreciation for the alliance, for the relationship, and that we are all going to be much better off in coming years when we continue to know that we will be side by side and working in lockstep on things that really matter. So with that, thank you very much.
Can we get the first panel to come up? Because we'll take a break after the first panel. Thank you. thanks to Mr. Kagan for the great keynote speech. So we'll just now move along and move to panel 1 on the shifting geopolitics of Northeast Asia. In this panel, we'll discuss multiple simultaneous geostrategic challenges that the alliance faces, including the growing North Korean threat. We'll discuss a little bit more in detail US-China strategic competition, implications of the Ukraine conflict, and so on. So we'll just get started. We have stellar panelists here, and no one here really needs an introduction. Very well-known leaders, former practitioners, scholars, experts in the field, and you have their extensive bios. I'll just quickly highlight and just do it all once. So on my left is Victor Cha, Senior Vice President for Korea Chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, as well as a professor, vice dean, and DS Song KF Chair in the School of Foreign Service and Department of Government at Georgetown University, former NSC, former deputy head of delegation for the US at the Six Party Talks, currently also appointed by the Biden administration to an advisory role at the Defense Policy Board, also elected to serve on the board for the National Endowment for Democracy, senior fellow in human freedom at the George W. Bush Institute, co-host of the very popular CSIS's bi-weekly Capital Cable series, the one and only Victor Cha. I sound like Ambassador Lippert there. Okay, so we now then, left of him, we have Allison Hooker, longtime colleague from my CIA and INR days. She is currently a senior vice president at American Global Strategies, where she oversees the firm's Indo-Pacific practice. Decades of experience in the USG, more than 6 years at the National Security Council. Cannot believe that you survived that many years at the NSC, including Senior Director for Asia, Special Assistant to the President, and Senior Director for the Korean Peninsula. And then before NSC, having served as a Senior Analyst for North Korea in the Department of State's Bureau of Intelligence and Research. I'm having a nostalgic moment because I have fond memories of coordinating on the PDBs together. Then we have Ambassador Chun Young-woo, Chairman and founder of the Korean Peninsula Future Forum. He has had a distinguished diplomatic career of 33 years, including serving as a National Security Advisor to former President Lee Myung-bak, Second Vice Minister at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and the ROK Ambassador to UK. He also served as Special Representative and Chief Negotiator of the ROK delegation to the Six Party Talks. Obviously, Ambassador Chun and Victor Cha also, I'm sure, have share many fond memories together from that time. Long career in public service. Again, refer to his bio for his very impressive career. I see that also there is a Colombia connection as well with Victor Cha. Okay, so then we have Andrew Yeol, Dr. Andrew Yeol, Senior Fellow and the SK Korea Foundation Chair in Korean Studies at Brookings Institution. Dr. Yeol is also Professor Yeol. Everybody wears multiple hats, all right? Professor of Politics and Director of Asian Studies at the Catholic University of America. He's prolific author of numerous books, including Asia's Regional Architecture, Alliances, Institutions in the Pacific Century, co-author, co-editor of numerous books and journals, and a great colleague and a good friend. Last but not least, we have Dr. Gu-yeon Jung, Associate Professor, Department of Political Science at Gangwon National University. Dr. Jung is Associate Professor in so there was Associate Professor Gangwon. She also serves as a member of several policy advisory committees, including the Ministry of Unification, Ministry of National Defense, National Unification Advisory Council, and Republic of Korea Navy. She's also research fellow at the Institute of International Studies at Seoul National University, and so on. Great to have you at the Wilson Center. So with that, we'll get started. Two recent events have really reshaped geostrategic landscape in the region. Right? We have the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the growing US-China competition. Meanwhile, North Korea's nuclear and missile programs are rapidly expanding, which really has sparked intense dialogue between Washington and Seoul over how to bolster US extended deterrence. And as we heard from Edgar Kagan, really the presidents of South Korea and US, President Yoon and President Biden have really established a good working relationship. They have good chemistry, good rapport, good working relationship. And President Yoon obviously will have a state visit next week here. But the two countries still confront many major issues without easy answers. So we're going to talk about some of this and the way forward for the US-ROK alliance amid very challenging geostrategic landscape. So we're going to start with Victor. Maybe we'll start with you. Can we just start with the most immediate issue that's facing the alliance, increasing threat from North Korea? Let's get that out of the way. North Korea continues to build its nuclear arsenal. They just tested first ever flight test of Hwasong-18 solid fuel ICBM just last week, which is harder to detect and preempt. So questions for you and also the rest of the panelists are these increased North Korean capabilities a game changer or more of the same? What is North Korea's goals? How should South Korea and US respond? Where are we with North Korea? Easy questions, Victor.
So you just want initial intervention,
Yes,
right?
yes,
So,
yeah.
well, first, thank you, Sue. It's a pleasure to be here at the Wilson Center. Ambassador Green, much thanks to him as well. I really enjoy collaborating across the centers with Brookings and CSIS and Wilson, so really enjoy that. Also good to see Hagin Hui and Pak Chun-hee, my good friends. I should say this is a bit of a six-party reunion up here, if you think about it, because Edgard's now left, but Edgard was the political counselor at the embassy in Beijing when we were, six-party talks were
I
in
did not know
Beijing.
that.
So you know they were held in Beijing, and Edgard was the political counselor at the time. Allison was the INR person on the delegation, and then Ambassador Chun was the six-party head of delegation for the South Koreans. And I have to say that, and I'm not just saying this because you're here, but Ambassador Chun really has been or was one of the most creative South Korean diplomats that we had the pleasure of working with. Because as many of you know, in these sorts of negotiations, North Korea doesn't really come up with very many ideas about moving the negotiation forward. And when they do come up with ideas, they're usually not good ideas. But Ambassador Chun always came up with good ideas for moving the relationship forward, the discussion forward. Okay, I guess the way I'd answer your question, Sue, is I'd actually step back and say the external environment right now is one that is quite concerning to me because it's creating a vicious spiral in the sense that the war in Ukraine obviously has created security deficits for all actors on the international stage. In addition to that, you know, China, as you said, has become much more assertive, not just in the Taiwan Straits, but in the East Sea, right, in the Yellow Sea, as has Russia. And of course, North Korea is firing all of these missiles. Now, on top of that, Japan is committed to doubling its defense spending. South Korea is passing one of the largest defense budget increases that we've seen in a long time, and they're fortifying kill chain and other sorts of things. And then we have the U.S., Japan, and Korea doing all of this trilateral exercising, everything from missile defense to strategic bomber runs and all sorts of things. The point of all this is to say that this is not the type of environment in which you can approach North Korea and say, please disarm, right? Let's have a negotiation about disarmament. This is not a good environment. Instead, their response, because they see security threats everywhere, is to ramp up their testing, which then, of course, sets off this sort of chain reaction. So I think we're caught in a bit of a vicious circle now. Of course, North Korea has their own plan, very clearly, as you said, and as they've telegraphed very clearly in their January New Year's speech, it's not just ICBMs, it's mobile launch, solid propellant ICBMs, and now they're talking about these all sorts of other areas, including tactical battlefield nuclear weapons and other things. My guess is their goal is to have a modern nuclear weapons force the size of at least the UK, if not France. And right now there's nothing sort of stopping them, and my point is the external environment is creating a situation in which it's very difficult to pull them into a negotiation. I certainly understand what Edgard said about efforts by the Biden administration. They have made many efforts to try to contact the North Koreans with with no success. This is in part, as he said, what did he say? Not a mistake, it's a decision.
Yes.
But that decision is inextricably intertwined with what's happening in the external environment.
Thanks, Victor. So that doesn't sound too great, but so following up on what Victor said, we'll just maybe, Allison, we'll just take your take on this. You also spent too many years devoted on this issue, from intelligence to policy. Victor just talked about vicious spiral, vicious circle, not a good environment, external environment for us, better environment for them. What do we do here? And so just your initial intervention on North Korea.
Sure, thank you. And I also would like to thank the Wilson Center and Kais for the opportunity to be here today. It's a great honor to be on this panel and to see so many old friends and colleagues here today. It was a little more than 6 years. It was 77 months on the National Security Council staff, just if anyone's counting. I counted when I left, but it was a great privilege and a great honor. And also to do the work we did in the intelligence community. It was also a great privilege to do that as well. And yes, I mean, over those years, we looked a lot at how North Korea thinks, how North Korea acts, what's the decision-making process. And I think Victor set it up very well, as did Edgard. The external environment is empowering Kim. Kim is an opportunist, and I don't say that I know exactly what he's thinking, but he's an opportunist. We see him using the environment to advance the programs, to make them, in his mind, I'm sure, irreversible, hoping that they're irreversible, both on the nuclear and the missile front. And because of the external environment, there's very little that can be done at the moment, absent risky actions that could start a conflict. And that's the last thing that our governments want to see. The governments of the world don't have the bandwidth or the energy to deal with another hot conflict or another crisis. So, as I said, Kim is using this time to advance his programs with very little repercussion. So what do we do? I mean, it's a great question. It is a very sort of depressing topic, but I think you'll remember that anytime that, in our jobs, we were always giving depressing information to our bosses and to those who are trying to figure out what to do. Negotiations, well, we'll set that aside for a moment. And given Kim's actions, I'm not sure how successful they would be, even if they chose to engage right now. But I do think we still have some options. No one likes to talk about sanctions. It feels like sanctions are not productive, that they fail in producing any results. The UN Security Council is hamstrung because China and Russia are not going to participate in bringing new sanctions against North Korea. But as I think we've talked about before in different fora, there's still sanctions that can be implemented, and I think grouping together with like-mindeds and with allies and figuring out what each country can do to bring their various efforts to bear could still have an impact on North Korea. Now, there's the China question and the China problem, which we will, I'm sure, get into later in our discussion. China's going to continue to provide for North Korea what is being withheld from it as needed to prevent any kind of instability. But I do think that there are ways that we can continue, the collective we, can continue to cause pain for North Korea if we do take that approach. In the past, we called this the maximum pressure campaign under President Trump's administration, the global pressure campaign under President Obama's administration. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of energy, diplomatic energy, and also willingness from other parties. But it can be done to a certain extent, and that's one way of putting pressure on North Korea. Another thing that we are doing, the collective we are doing, and it should be done, is continuing to beef up deterrence. And that's done through what's been happening over the past couple of days, through exercises, through engagement, military engagement with our allies and partners. And that's great because, not just because you're, demonstrating strength, it's great because you're also building capacity with the U.S., with our South Korean allies, and now also returning to a trilateral engagement and efforts on that front as well. And that's useful for a number of reasons as well. Like, North Korea is not the only challenge in the region. I think it's a great development to have interoperability and increased capacity trilaterally for some of the other hotspots, potential hotspots in the region as well. And I will stop there, except that I did want to foot stomp what Chancellor Park said about the trilateral engagement, and not to jump topics, but I do think, additional, there's more room to proceed in the trilateral space. You have info sharing, you have cybersecurity, trilateral efforts on those fronts, and all of that is worth doing, and I hope that they do. So I'll stop there, and
Just a quick follow-up. Do you think there's any way we can persuade China to take to more on North Korea sanctions front, or that's just so tied to U.S.-China, we're just not going to get there? So on sanctions, we just kind of move on
yeah,
without.
It's a great question because I think we often hear, well, if we could just get China to help. Well, I mean, China, I think in our experience, and I won't speak for former colleagues, but I think in our experience, China was helpful when it benefited them. You get China to take action on North Korea when it is worried that something worse is going to happen if it doesn't apply pressure to North Korea, or that it somehow benefits China in another way. So I don't really see I don't see China being helpful without exacting some cost from the United States or from South Korea as well. I'm not sure it's worth that trade.
Thank you. Ambassador Chan, you also devoted many years, too many years, including serving as a special rep as a chief negotiator for the ROK delegation to the six-party talks. You just heard from Victor Cha and Allison. Your take on this issue?
Well, despite Victor Cha's effusive compliments on my diplomatic skills, what I share with Victor Cha, with Alison Hooker and Mr. Kagan, is that we collectively failed to denuclearize North Korea, and that's where we are now. So the problem is getting worse, as Victor Cha said, and you mentioned. We now have a solid fuel ICBM, the first test of Pasung 18 ICBM, which is very alarming. In addition to the development of and maybe deployment of maneuverable solid fuel shorter range missiles. So the security situation on the Korean Peninsula is very bleak, grim, without any prospect of getting better anytime soon. So what do we do about this? We have heard about how to bolster the extended deterrence. Actually, I see no problem with extended deterrence. It is as strong as it can be, but the problem with the whole narrative about extended deterrence is about how to reassure. This is about reassurance. Reassure the Korean people that U.S. will not fail to respond to North Korea's use of nuclear weapons instantly. So there is, with the growing sense of insecurity. There is a abiding concern whether U.S. will be will actually respond to North Korean nuclear use as promised by the extended deterrence commitment. So what we need is a sense of ownership, a sense of participation in decision-making on the use of U.S. nuclear weapons in a time of contingency. So actually, it's not about bolstering extended deterrence itself, but how Koreans feel more assured about the U.S. determination to respond to North Korea's first nuclear use. Another is, I think, more important than actually extended deterrence is how to deny North Korea's use of nuclear weapons when deterrence fails. And North Korea is different from all other nuclear armed states in that likelihood of deterrence failure is real. It fails not because of the deficiency in U.S. extended deterrence, but because of North Korea's domestic political crisis. They don't have it now, but at some point down the road, when Kim Jong-un has nothing to lose by using nuclear weapons, the deterrence fails. So strong deterrence and assured retaliation, massive retaliation against North Korea, for the Koreans who are close to the ground zero, this is like a post-mortem prescription, or what the Korean proverb says, fixing the barns after the cattle is stolen. Mm-hmm. So after tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of casualties, even if U.S. responds with nuclear weapons, that would be too late. So we have to be able to deny North Korea's nuclear use. And now that we have, it has become far more difficult to detect how many minutes away North Korea is before they launch nuclear-capable missiles. This is daunting, a new challenge for us. Another is what do we do with North Korea itself, nuclear-armed North Korea? Living in peace with nuclear-armed North Korea is not a sustainable option. Yeah, we can do that as long as North Korean regime is stable, but we cannot guarantee whether North Korea can maintain the political stability. That's beyond our control. And I don't know whether it's morally right to try to, to keep North Korean regime intact, stable. But that's another issue. But I think we need a concerted strategy between allies on how to fundamentally resolve North Korean problem, what to do with North Korea. And if sustainable peace is not an option, and if Kim Jong-un has no intention whatsoever to disarm or to denuclearize, then I'm not sure whether we should live with or feel comfortable with living with nuclear-armed North Korea for good.
So, sort of one of the impact of Ukraine conflict on North Korea, do you think it's?
Yeah, I think it has. I think the geopolitical landscape is not conducive to denuclearization or continued peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula. Somehow, Ukraine has changed the diplomatic alignment of North Korea with China and Russia. Somehow, as you know, North Korea happened to be one of the very rare countries, 4 countries, 4 member states of the UN to support in the UNGA resolution to support Russian invasion. And that's very unusual because North Korea has maintained a steadfast position against attack by a bigger country on a smaller neighbor. That has been North Korea's consistent policy. But now, North Korea has indirectly legitimized America's use of force against North Korea. So otherwise, they will contradict themselves, right? When they support Russian invasion of Ukraine, I don't know what they're going to say about if U.S. invades or attacks North Korea, preemptive strike on North Korea. They are actually supporting. This is a stronger case, and they are actually legitimizing U.S. military action against them. But the reason they did, in my view, was that they were so desperate for an insurance policy in the Security Council to get Russia veto under any circumstance, any resolution that could be harmful to North Korea. And another insurance policy is that they have a new supplier of energy and food from Russia. These are the 2 commodities that North Korea needs most to overcome the current economic crisis within North Korea. So, in the short term, this would be a success for Kim Jong-un's diplomacy. But in the long term, I don't know. And the strategic competition between China and U.S. is also inflicting some. I think this is China's aggressive expansionism should be contained and countered. I don't have any doubt about that. But what I'm saying is the heated strategic competition will have a repercussion on the Korean Peninsula in that China loses incentives to cooperate with the U.S. and other partners in denuclearizing North Korea. And it will feel more obliged to support North Korea to get North Korea on China's side in competition with the U.S. So these new geopolitical developments are not very encouraging, from the Korean perspective.
Well, we can talk about North Korea all day, so it's a depressing picture. So let's just pivot a little bit because we do have to cover other issues, if that's okay. So Andrew, do feel free to comment on anything that you've heard about North Korea. But last year when we did this, you did write a very great piece on Ukraine, piece on South Korea and Ukraine. So maybe we can shift gear a little bit and talk, bring an issue of Ukraine, implications of the Ukraine conflict, and whatever you want to talk about.
Sure, thanks, Sue. And before I begin, I just want to thank you and also Kayla and also Kais. They finally made it here, so I'm glad they could do it. You are the ultimate party planner, inviting our Korean friends here, and I'm so thankful to see that they
event management.
They made it. But shout out to Kayla and also to Dr. Kim Min-sung from Kais for really helping make this happen. And as you mentioned, I was sitting in this very seat talking about Ukraine and Korea last year, and I was rereading the memo, and I had 5 policy recommendations. I feel like you can almost check all of them because I mentioned that Korea should support Ukraine to help rebrand South Korea's foreign policy and strategic narrative in a direction towards principles and values. I had mentioned pursuing strategic dialogue with NATO and the EU, and of course they had the summit meeting with NATO in Madrid. I mentioned increasing humanitarian assistance for Ukraine. I talked about boosting military readiness and defense and deterrence because everyone was thinking about where can the next kinetic action happen. So on one front, I feel like the boxes are checked, but the challenges seem to be greater. They seem to be even larger looking at this a year afterwards. So I wanted to bring up 3 points, and for the interest of time, I only may address 2 in terms of Ukraine and its implications for Korea and geopolitics. So the first is that, first let me talk about the implications for the Ukraine war and South Korea is a global pivotal state. So I think South Korea's position on Ukraine indicates that Korea stands for principles and values such as sovereignty, the rule of law. Russia's egregious invasion of the Ukraine has been called out by South Korea. The Koreans have stood by the Ukrainians at the UN. They've called out Russia's invasion. They've joined export controls against Russia and also Belarus. So I think it's very clear where South Korea stands when it comes to the war in Ukraine. And I also think that South Korea has become recognized more as a strategic player. The $5.8 billion in arms sales to Poland last year, I think really has been a wake-up call to other countries about South Korea's arms export industry. And I think that has been acknowledged and welcomed by Europeans or other Central European countries that are looking into arms agreements with South Korea. I do think that in the upcoming summit there may be even further discussion, in part because the leaks have highlighted once again South Korea's concerns about whether they should or should not be providing lethal weapons, but that will definitely, I think, come up again. And South Korea has been receiving pressure, not just from the U.S., but from also NATO as well, to provide more weapons to the cause in Ukraine. And there's certainly opportunities to deepen security and economic ties with Europe. In some ways, South Korea engaging more with Europe is not only useful for South Korea, not only for South Korea's economy, but if you think about diplomatic strategy, I think South Korea can see, we had the recent visit from Macron to China, and also the German foreign minister was in China. And these European countries have different approaches to how they deal with China. And I think South Korea is also thinking about how they can sustain, they can maintain this alliance relationship with the United States, but also see where there may be some flexibility with China. So I think that's one of the implications of the Ukraine war. The second is something that we had already brought up, and that's implications for diplomacy with North Korea. I hate to add more onto this dour prognosis, but it does create further roadblocks for North Korean diplomacy. I think Russia has no appetite for additional sanctions, and I think as South Korea continues to support Ukraine, that may motivate Russia to seek additional support from North Korea. There's already been reports about North Korean arms entering Russia, that North Korea has been providing them through the Wagner Group, and Russia may be expecting more from North Korea. And we already see that North Korea is just mouthing the same line that Moscow has given in terms of the motivations or reasons for why Russia has invaded Ukraine. And that has also spillover effects for global politics and governance. We have the China-Russia axis, and North Korea can be seen as a junior partner. And so we can see how this dynamic is playing out in global politics. So I'm happy to address further questions if we have time for a Q&A, but I'll stop right there.
That shows you wrote an excellent piece. It's timeless, right? You can just literally reprint it. Well, we have it actually. Check it out. Check out the book, Two Presidents, One Agenda. Thank you. Professor Chung, maybe we can just sort of broaden this out even further and just talk a little bit about South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy, general.
Thank you, Sumi. Let's pivot to Indo-Pacific. So I'll briefly talk about South Korea's perspectives about Indo-Pacific and what's the kind of achievements so far under the Yoon administration, and what's the possible challenges that both allies have to respond in the coming great power competition. So let me first describe about South Korea's perspectives about Indo-Pacific. So Indo-Pacific is not just a geographical concept for South Korea. It's a kind of strategic space. As many of our panelists have already mentioned, it's a kind of space where like-minded countries attempt to sustain rules-based orders and maintain favorable balance of power in that effort. But flip side of the statement is that the order and balance of powers are threatened by rise of regions' power, especially China. We haven't been discussed yet, and their coercive behavior. So South Korea just shared this idea that this current power transitions and decline of order should be responded collectively with the U.S. and like-minded countries. So I think the recent introduction of South Korea's Indo-Pacific strategy is a kind of evidence that South Korea's willingness to play a role, not just a kind of middle power, it's a kind of more player, strategic or regional players in that regards. And you can see that it's just less than a year since Yoon administration actually inaugurated. The May 10th will be the first year actually. And when you look back for the last years, we have achieved a lot of things to make South Korea a space and connecting the dot between regional countries. First of all, many other panelists already mentioned we have reconciliation with Japan. And of course, we have 2+2 security policy dialogue with Japan as well, and trilateral cooperation, joining Asian Pacific 4, and engaging Pacific Island countries and ASEAN countries. So this is just only a few kind of accomplishments South Korea have accomplished to implement its Indo-Pacific strategy and try to find a kind of space where it can play a role as Andrew just mentioned, a global pivotal state is a kind of vision that can be implemented by the strategy of Indo-Pacific. So I think by building and joining these layers of regional security architecture, South Korea believes that this could be the kind of minimal, and this is kind of baseline from which they can resist the current revisionism and great power competition. So that's the kind of minimal denominator, I think. But the thing is that, as Victor and Andrew and Mr. Chun mentioned, there is a vicious cycle in the Indo-Pacific as well. And it seems like that vicious cycle in the Korean Peninsula and as well as in the Pacific are kind of entangling one another. So that's the kind of thing that worst scenario we are expecting. But it seems like we are having that kind of possibility. Just yesterday, China sent a warning to South Korea that it was going to hold a drill on the Yellow Sea. So they kind of send a warning that we are kind of, South Korean army should be out of that place. So it should be, it could be a kind of interpreted as a kind of signal that it's a response to a kind of recent trilateral joint drills between US, South Korea, and Japan. So I think this entangled vicious cycle is, as many of the panelists mentioned, it is not a conducive environment for South Korea to denuclearize, to kind of persuade North Korea, but at the same time, not just South Korea, but any middle powers to maintain its strategic autonomy under the great power competition. So in that regards, we cannot just avoid the topic of Taiwan, I guess. Taiwan, of course, from South Korea's perspective, and even at the popular level, we are very sympathetic about the situations, and we understand that any kind of inadvertent crisis escalations can trigger power transition in this region, at least littoral countries around the Western Pacific. And we already seen that increasing grades and operation by China, especially during the United States high-ranking officials visit during China as well. So, and also we are seeing that China especially kind of touching Taiwan's air defense identification zones, which attempt to highlight Taiwan's vulnerability of air power. And Chinese kind of raising the level of coerciveness every time China conduct exercise these days. So we can see a gradual change of status quo in the regions, and I believe United States' primary concern is that part, and we understand that and share that concern. But so South Korea is in the Pacific strategy, but in the Pacific countries. But as we have discussed, and actually Kagan mentions, there are competing kind of interests between allies. South Korea, of course, share the threat perceptions and share the concern. But we already mentioned we have North Korea issue. And when it comes to Taiwan, we haven't really initiated any official dialogue between countries. And we can say, like, number of contingencies and number of inadvertent kind of crisis escalation scenario around Taiwan. But what we more care about is that whether North Korea might kind of take opportunistic behavior during the crisis and contingencies with or without Chinese acquiescence. And also China might expand experiment beyond Taiwan to U.S. allies in the region. So that could be factored into our crisis escalation exercises or even dialogue topics for two allies. So there is so what I think is that we are kind of having a very good fundamentals, like security architecture we have built and layers of unilateral and multilateral cooperations. But we have to build use that security architectures to move on to, for instance, like next 70 years. But at the same time, resist this current of great power competition, I guess. So what we have now, what the current task, like pending task, will be kind of narrowing down the strategic interest of South Korea and United States and the interest of allies. So that's the thing kind of we have to manage. I think we can manage that differences. So I stop here.
Does Allison or Ambassador John or even Victor, do you want to comment a little bit on Taiwan piece, on South Korea?
Well, Taiwan is, I think, more important to Korea for its economic security than even to the U.S. or Japan. Almost, I think, 90% of our energy imports are transported through Taiwan Straits or the sea lanes of communication running through the ocean in the vicinity of Taiwan. So if contingency arises, if China invades Taiwan, I think the economic impact on Korea will be tremendous. So we have a vital interest in the stability of Taiwan Strait. No disturbances there that could endanger our economic lifeline. But if I don't think nobody knows, but I don't think Xi Jinping would grossly miscalculate to invade Taiwan. I think his strategy is to scare Taiwan into submission without using force. Unless Taiwan declares officially independence from China and directly violate one China principle that China cherishes so much, then I think it will be very difficult to find a pretext to invade Taiwan. But if something happens there, if that happens, despite my wishful thinking, then despite the interest that Korea has, economic interest, and the security interest, it will be very difficult for the ROK to intervene directly, militarily in Taiwan Strait. But we have to be more vigilant about North Korean threat, just in case North Korea takes advantage of Taiwan Straits. So we have to be more better prepared for that kind of contingency. And I think U.S. may wish to use U.S. Air Force based in Korea to support Taiwan's military effort, right? I think ground troops will not be necessary there, but Air Force might be the only component of USFK in Korea that can be useful in responding to China's aggression. But I think that will create some kind of vacuum, and I think there are better ways to fill, to deal with China's invasion. There are, the USFK, U.S. Air Force in Korea is, in terms of firepower, is equivalent to about one carrier group. So Indo-Pacific Command has 5 carrier groups. So I think they have also far more significant U.S. Air Force in Japan. So I think there will be, without using U.S. Air Force in Korea, I think there will be many other ways that U.S. can deal with the situation.
Okay, thank you. I think everybody has two fingers here, so we'll start with Victor.
So, I agree with everything that Ambassador Chun just said. I would just add that it's interesting to watch this discussion about Taiwan as it has evolved in terms of the trilateral coordination among the U.S., Japan, and Korea. I think prior to the Yoon administration, my concern was actually there was a decoupling of theaters taking place, where the Japanese were only focusing on Taiwan, not talking at all about North Korea, and the Koreans were focused on the Korean Peninsula. I think that has changed now after President Yoon's efforts, which, to me, the headline of Edgard's speech was the White House calling President Yoon's actions on Japan showing real political courage. And I agree with that. I thought it showed a tremendous amount of courage and leadership. About the costliest signal you can send in Korean politics is to talk about improving relations with Japan, and he took that on as his first task. So anyway, I think what that has done, it has created a new conversation in U.S., Japan, Korea trilateral, where there now is active thinking about a Taiwan Straits contingency and opportunistic aggression by North Korea, and how should the three allies deal with that. In effect, I think that there's a lot more focus on the notion that U.S. air assets and Japanese assets would be involved in the Taiwan contingency, but it becomes even more important for Korean capabilities and Korean assets and even U.S. assets on the peninsula to stay put, because even though there will be a temptation to use the Air Force squadrons in a Taiwan Straits crisis to deter that sort of opportunistic aggression. And the reason to deter it, of course, is that you don't want North Korea to do something, but even more, I think, from a South Korean perspective, is that we don't want, the U.S. and Korea don't want, and Japan don't want a situation where the potential use of nuclear weapons on a U.S. side the threshold goes down. Mm-hmm. Right, and if we are in a situation where there's an all-out war in the Taiwan Straits, and North Korea does something, mm-hmm. Arguably that stretches U.S. capabilities enough so that they need to consider possibly lowering the threshold for nuclear use. Nobody wants that scenario, so it's important in that sense for U.S. and Korean assets on the peninsula to stay put to prevent that from happening. So.
Excellent. Allison?
Yeah, I would only agree with both of the comments that were just made. I would only add that I'm not sure that Xi Jinping has made up his mind yet about Taiwan, what he wants to do, and the best way to try to affect that is to build deterrence in Taiwan, and there are lots of ways to do that, and there are lots of conversations that are happening about that, but thinking about what Korea and the U.S. and Japan as well can do, particularly given sort of Korea's desire to balance its actions with regard to Taiwan, they're less risky things. So what about helping to build resilience or disaster preparedness in the name of disaster preparedness, not necessarily in the name of what happens if China attacks, Taiwan. So there could be some things that are a little bit less high profile that Korea could do to build deterrence, to build Taiwanese capacity that would be welcomed by the United States and also by Japan. I just wanted to add that. That's it.
Thank you. Andrew?
Just very briefly, I was very pleased to hear Ambassador Chun make his remarks, because it's very rare to hear someone of your stature to really comment on Taiwan so articulately. And I felt that after the trilateral meeting in Phnom Penh, in DC, there was a lot of experts that were saying, yes, this is one of the issues that we need to address or have conversations around, because we know that the Japanese are more forward-leaning than Korea on Taiwan, but as Ambassador Chun mentioned, it very much affects South Korea's economic security, its energy supplies. And even if it's just to say that what South Korea can and can't do. For instance, this argument about the ROK Air Force staying put. Like, I haven't really heard that argument articulated in public. So the point isn't to have, pardon? Okay. Maybe it has been articulated in public, but I just think that there needs to be more conversations around this, and not just because if a contingency actually does happen, it's just too late. If you're now trying to then come together with some sort of plan, so it would be good to see more of these conversations taking place. So thank you, Ambassador Chun.
Go ahead. Did you want
Yeah.
to
Well,
comment?
Well, thank you for your comments. I didn't say that the most unlikely invasion by China can be transformed into a blessing in disguise. I think U.S. can do that. I think I'm not a military expert, but I think crossing 100 nautical mile strait, choppy waters, while being precisely aimed at by Taiwanese anti-ship missiles, that should be far more difficult than Russian army crossing the Dnieper River. I know that Taiwan Strait is far wider than Dnieper River, and it should be far more difficult for China than China invading Vietnam in '79. They share a border, so crossing the border should be far easier, land border. Well, today's China is not what it used to be in '79, but still, I think still, if hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Chinese PLA troops have to drown in crossing the strait, I think that could be an opportunity to reverse China's rise and military rise, and I think to halt China's aggressive, or to reflect on their aggressive expansionism. So instead of worrying about what should we do, I think U.S. can be smarter than that by taking advantage of that opportunity to exhaust China's expansionist, energy, and then I think in the longer term, East Asia will be more peaceful and more stable without China's resort to expansionist policies anymore. Well, maybe I have gone too far.
No. Thank you for that.
But we have to think about that.
Sure. We're running out of time, so I'm going to give audience a chance to ask a question or two, a few questions. If you could just raise your hand and name an affiliation and a quick question. While we wait for that, I just want to sort of what Victor said on this Korea-Japan piece, the rapprochement piece. We often get asked how long will this last, what impact it will have, and so on. But I take also what Alison was saying, like there's a lot that can be still more done on that trilateral piece, and I do agree with Victor Chao's comment that. And what Edgar was saying, I think President Yoon's decision I think that was a very brave and difficult decision. But I think that's a very important point. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, Edgar sort of downplayed the trilateral Phnom Penh statement, but if you think about that statement, if you read that statement, I know that people don't generally read, like we all kill ourselves to write these things and nobody actually reads them. But if you read that statement, it really is extraordinary as a document for the three governments together in terms of the scope of what they were talking about. It's really an extraordinary document. It's even more extraordinary when you think that the South Korean president agreed to that before having completed the forced labor conscription arrangement with Japan. That takes a lot of guts, frankly. And as I said earlier, the costliest signal you can send, and I mean, the hardest signals to send in diplomacy and international relations are ones that are costly at home. And that's exactly what he's doing. Now, he's suffering because of that, because his poll ratings are very low. But, you know, one hopes that the combination of sort of this state visit where he will be treated extremely well, then the G7, right, and then the NATO summit in Vilnius where the AP4 will go, you know, these things will show the fruits of sort of the things that he's doing.
Do we have any questions? Jim? Sure, for the people in the back.
Thank you very much for today. I'm Jim Schoaf from the Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA. And I just wanted to pick up on this discussion about Taiwan and, of course, as Ambassador Chun mentioned, how important stability and the status quo, preserving the status quo in Taiwan is. It seems to be that the most important thing that South Korea could do today is to help Russia fail in its invasion of Ukraine. That could potentially be the single most important deterrent for China in the future. Is there more that South Korea can do in support of Russia, or that the U.S. and South Korea can do together? Thank you.
Excellent question. Do you want to answer that? Who wants to answer that?
Well,
Yeah, you want to answer that? Go ahead, both of you.
yeah.
First.
Well, I think Russia's failure on the battlefields of Ukraine will be good news for East Asia. But it will be best. But even if it doesn't fail, to the extent that Russia is consumed by Ukraine, they will have less resources left to disrupt peace in East Asia. So I'm sorry for the Ukrainians who are fighting hard, but I think I think the security of East Asia and Europe are not separate, because Russia is not just a European country. It has borders with the Korean Peninsula. There's long borders with China. Russia is the only country which violated Korean airspace over Dokdo over the past few years. Mm-hmm. Very aggressive violation. They were warned, but they repeated to violate, that they intrude into the airspace. They were lucky not to be shut down, but I think they'll have to be more careful when their military force is very much exhausted in the European theater. So, what was your second question? Yeah, I think I answered your question, right?
Andrew
Just
will
very
pick up
quickly on the
and
part
answer
about
question.
what more can South Korea do. I mean, I don't think South Korea's contribution will make or break whether you have whether the Ukrainians can regain all their territory and militarily defeat the Russians. But you know, it's quite sensitive for South Korea because they have a law that prevents them from exporting weapons to states that are in conflict. But you know, right now, things that they're doing, you know, they can continue to backfill stocks of other countries who are actually NATO countries that are supplying weapons to the Ukraine. You could do an accounting of all your, you can export parts to weapons or weapons that have South Korean parts in them, so you can do an accounting of what those weapons are, and then you can have a pre-authorization of those transfers in place. So in some ways, you can provide more support for NATO allies, perhaps even the United States. Whether they go ahead and actually provide weapons and change the law, I don't know. I think that may still be a bit too sensitive for South Korea.
Yeah.
Victor also had two points, and then we can get to you.
And reconstruction is the other part, because they've I think pledged $130 million.
No, I agree. I mean, I think those things are a given, like the humanitarian assistance, reconstruction, that's all given. The real question is whether they should provide lethal assistance. And I mean, this is just me speaking, but I'm of the view that Korea should get to a point where it does, whether it's backfilling or providing, backfilling munitions to other parties or providing directly, just because the stakes, I think, as Ambassador Chen and everybody said here, are so high. Russia cannot win in Ukraine. They just cannot win in Ukraine. It has all sorts of implications for Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific security, but also direct implications for Korea if Russia wins. So this is as important to Korea and its own security as it is to the Ukrainians. And in addition to that, the Yoon government talks about GPS, right? Global pivotal state. There is no stronger statement of being a global pivotal state than to do something like this. Now, I understand all the legal and other issues around this, and those are real. And for that reason, they are constrained in terms of what they can do. But the stakes here are much higher. This is not just something happening in the distant, far away place. It's very important for Korea. The second thing I'll say is that sometimes you hear that, well, they shouldn't because Russia will sanction South Korea for its actions. Russia already has blamed South Korea for being involved in this war. So they're already going to take the punishment from Russia no matter what they do. And so that's the whole notion of sanctions being the reason that they should not do this is, to me, a moot point, because Russia will sanction South Korea as hard as they can.
Did you want to say something?
Just a few words on ROK's role. Korea's dilemma is that we have the largest stockpiles of munitions, maybe in the world. I don't know how many North Korea has, but we have among the Western countries, pro-Western countries, we have the largest stockpile, and all NATO members know about that. So as far as they had, stockpiles left, we could replenish their diminishing stockpiles, right? We had no problem of providing lethal weapons to Ukraine or not, but we can keep replenishing the decreasing stockpiles. That's easier part. But when NATO members run out of their own stockpile, then Russia will know that, even if we export to the frontline countries, frontline NATO member states, Russia will be more angry at ROK for actually supplying the weapons that can be used against Russian troops. But I think to the extent that they have any single remaining munition stockpile, we don't have to worry that much about that. But I think depending on how long the conflict goes on, we will come to a moment's truth.
Thanks, Jim. Obviously, that was a great question that spurred another whole conversation. We're running out of time, so we'll take one more question, and that's coming from David Maxwell. Okay, we'll take two questions. David Maxwell in front.
Thank you. Dave Maxwell, the Center for Asia-Pacific Strategy. Great comments by all, and just to the last comment, I would like to see Korea become a full partner in the arsenal of democracy. I think they've really gotten a chance to do that. But I'd like to ask you about the Ministry of Unification, their new white paper that just came out, and really mentioned a couple really important things. Of course, denuclearization of North Korea versus the Korean Peninsula, but it also had a strong statement about human rights as well as a free and democratic Korea. And I'd just like to ask you if that white paper will inform the summit statements next week and will really chart a course for the future of the alliance, assuming the United States will support those policies that are outlined in there. Thank you.
So maybe Ambassador Chung can take that question, but let's take another question right here, and then we'll wrap it up.
Hi, I'm Eugene from Gyeongyang Daily News. And ahead of the summit next week, actually South Korea government expressed its desire to move forward with the bilateral cooperation between U.S. and ROK on cybersecurity and intelligence sharing. And I wonder whether the U.S. sees it as a viable option, or whether U.S. also sees the need to it, and if such bilateral cooperation between ROK and U.S. actually comes on the surface, would that has the potential to move into a trilateral format as well?
Okay, so do you want to take the question on Ambassador Chen on David Maxwell's question on unification white paper? when you-
I didn't take
yeah.
the point.
Oh.
Is there anybody? I cannot speak for Korean government. I'm out of touch.
I can answer.
Yeah, can you answer that then?
Trilateral, trilateral is very important issue. I think this is what President Yoon seemingly attaches great importance to. And I think as a result of his visit to Japan lately, we conducted with Japan and the US trilateral missile defense drills. But very few people know the biggest problem in conducting such trilateral exercises, naval exercises, is about naming, about how to name the body of water where the drills are taking place.
Yeah.
That would be the biggest obstacle.
Professor Jung, did you want to?
Japan wants to call it Sea of Japan. Korea can never accept that. So we should call it, or the three countries call it East Sea, or at least we need a slash or something, to use both names. But Japan is very fundamentalist when it comes to this kind of naming. And Korea can not compromise on that. So I don't know how they can manage that problem in the future. We need more exercises. But I think the naming will stand in the way, if ever.
But you're the most creative diplomat, according to Victor Cha, so maybe you can help advise the South Korean government. Okay, Professor Jung.
Yeah, when it comes to human rights, I think South Korean government's really seriously taking it. Especially Ministry of Education, they emphasize human rights over humanitarian assistance and economic developments. And South Korean government also framing this US-ROK alliances as kind of value-ridden alliances. So they are emphasizing and understanding this, not only declining of democracy, but also emphasizing human rights. And even for the cybersecurity, South Korea is thinking about how we can build a kind of free digital kind of orders, how we can get rid of digital authoritarianism. So we are thinking really seriously about this issue. And human rights for the North Korea is not an exception, I guess. It's highly likely, I guess, in the kind of declaration for two countries, I guess.
Yeah.
Anybody have a comment on the cybersecurity piece? Cooperating?
So yes, I imagine that there will be more cooperation. One of the things that we've seen as a result of the pandemic and the 3-year COVID lockdown in North Korea, the lockdown of the border trade with China and with Russia has been a shift in increased use of North Korean cyber to acquire hard currency or cryptocurrency. And the White House has been very public about this starting last spring, about a year ago, where they announced not figures, right, with regard to how much they think North Korea is diverting cryptocurrency theft to their nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. So I think this is certainly a priority in terms of US-ROK and US-ROK Japan security. And I expect that the summit will have something on this as well.
So we can obviously talk all day. I know there are a lot more questions, but we got delayed. So I think now we'll have to conclude the first panel, and we'll take 13-minute break. We're supposed to take 15-minute break. Let's get back so we can start with the second panel on the economic challenges and opportunities. Thank you.
Okay, well, it's my pleasure to welcome you to panel 2 as part of our conference here at the Wilson Center on 70 years of the ROK-US Alliance, the past and the future. I'm Scott Snyder. I'm a senior fellow for Korea Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. And usually I am mired in the dismal parts of these conferences on the security side that we've all lived through, and I don't get a chance to participate in the optimistic side on economics, and there's a lot going on. And so I think that we'll have, a good discussion. My way of thinking about these two sessions is that in the past, we've talked about the US-South Korea alliance as forged in blood, but I think the question for the future is whether the alliance is going to be powered by chips, batteries, and clean technology. And so I think that's what we're really hopefully going to focus on with our panel today. And I think that we've already touched on some major themes, the issue of geopolitics, and actually its impact on economic security and economic cooperation frameworks. The way that the Biden administration has responded in terms of focusing on supply chain resiliency, the implications of economic coercion in the region, and also the prospects for deeper US-South Korea integration on technology. Those are the main themes that I'm hoping that we'll be able to discuss as part of this panel. We've got a fantastic group to address these issues. I'm just going to go very briefly to my left, Wendy Cutler, Vice President and Managing Director of the Asia Society Policy Institute, former acting Deputy U.S. Trade Representative, and I think most known in Korea as being involved with negotiations for the KORUS FTA. We'll talk more about that. Dr. Won-Ho Yun, Research Fellow and Head of the Economic Security Team at the Korea Institute for International Economic Policy. And I have noticed over the course of the past year that he has become the go-to person to speak about supply chain resiliency issues from South Korea in international conferences. Matt Goodman, Senior Vice President for Economics, Center for Strategic and International Studies, all-around economic policy doyen and former Obama administration trade official. And then Mia Oh, Director and Senior Faculty Lead of Korea Studies at SAIS Johns Hopkins, formerly at the Atlantic Council and well-known focusing on economic security. And Dr. Yu Young Ya, Professor of the Department of International Studies at Kyunghee University, and who has done research on China's economic coercion and regional order in East Asia, and that is a topic that I think will come up as part of our discussion. And so I just want to start with Wendy, because the Biden administration is the first administration in the last 3 administrations where we haven't been talking about KORUS in one form or another. How do you assess the state of the Korea-U.S. trade relationship, since it's not a focus of conversation so much? And also, how do you think it fits into the Korea-U.S. cooperation fits into IPEF, the Central Biden administration trade policy initiative?
I need to turn this on.
It looks like you can just talk.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's really my pleasure to be here. Whenever I'm invited to the 70-year anniversary events regarding the U.S. and Republic of Korea, I'm always asked, like, what was the most important event in our alliance? And so for me, I'm just going to put it on the table, while we were doing a lot of important work in the security area, I think that KORUS, if not one of the most defining moments of our alliance, is clearly one of the most defining moments of our alliance. Because if you remember what our economic relationship was before KORUS, it was one that was basically fraught with anxiety, acrimony, and we weren't playing from the same page, and there was a lot of mistrust. And with KORUS, that changed things and changed things dramatically. I think one of the most important things about KORUS was that both sides, each side for their own reason, wanted to be part of this negotiation. So it wasn't the U.S. pressuring Korea to be at the table, or it wasn't Korea begging the United States to be at the table with us. That at that time we had our own reasons for wanting a successful free trade agreement between the two countries. And despite a lot of ups and downs in the negotiation, we were able to accomplish that. But that was in 2007, and the agreement didn't come into effect for another 5 years. Scott alluded to one of the renegotiations under the Obama administration. But this agreement was also renegotiated during the Trump administration with a real threat of U.S. withdrawal. So in terms of like another renegotiation of KORUS, I don't think that's in the cards. Remember, any renegotiation or amendments we would make to this agreement would, for the most part, need congressional approval, and I don't think either side would want to go back to their legislatures to try and improve or update this agreement. So what we're left with then is a framework of KORUS and the ability to kind of build on that KORUS framework as we try and tackle the new challenges in our economic relationship. And for me, KORUS in three ways really lays the basis for this future economic cooperation. The first is that business ties between U.S. and Korean companies really took off as a result of KORUS, as a result of more trade and more investment. And both sides, both companies in each country looked for logical and lucrative partnerships between the two. And I think that those bonds have really helped kind of propel the situation where we are now, and we're seeing so much foreign direct investment from Korean companies in particular in the United States. Second, KORUS sets up a lot of committee meetings, including a joint committee meeting that's led at the ministers' level. And, you know, there are committees in everything from intellectual property to labor to small and medium-sized businesses. And while the mandate of many of these committees is to deal with implementation issues, it's also a forum to discuss emerging issues in these areas. And those fora are being used now as these committees meet. And the third proposition I put on the table is that as a result of KORUS now, we have about 15, 20 years of U.S. and Korean economic officials really building those relationships, which I think are instrumental in laying the groundwork as we deal with the next set of challenges. So KORUS, I think, has laid the basis, and we have seen under the Biden administration, both during President Moon's visit here, when he was president, we're now preparing for a state visit by Yoon, as well as lots of meetings between officials in both countries. There are a lot of new dialogues, new fora being established to discuss issues on the economic security agenda, including supply chain resiliency, coordinating on standards for advanced technologies, dealing with clean technologies, dealing with, you know, trying to prevent the next pandemic. So there are a lot of areas of overlap, of shared values, of shared interest. And so I'm very optimistic looking ahead that the United States and Korea can work on these challenges bilaterally to really strengthen our economic partnership even further, but also to lead and to be part of other groupings in the region and in the world, you know, as the world tries to grapple with a lot of these issues that have, you know, been put on the table, you know, just recently. So why don't I stop? Oh, IPEF, or you want me to come back to that?
You can stop there, but I'm going to ask you a follow-up question
Okay.
about IPEF and the other regional cooperation organizations and the role that the U.S., that KORUS and the US-ROK economic relationship plays in that context.
Mm-hmm. So just on IPEF, a few thoughts here. Number one, Korea has been an extremely strong partner with the United States in IPEF, both in terms of being out there early on in the process as we were trying to develop this initiative. Korea was instrumental in helping the United States bring on some of the other 13 partners in this initiative. And also, I think Korea has been very helpful in trying to work with us and work with other countries on developing the substance in each of the 4 pillars. Why do I think Korea has been so supportive? Number one, I think Korea very much welcomes stepped up U.S. economic engagement in the region. Second, I don't think this is said publicly, but I think Korea, like other countries in the region, like the U.S. economic presence to kind of balance the Chinese presence. But I also think that Korea, at least some senior policymakers in Korea, still have this kind of nagging regret that they weren't a founding member of TPP. And since they weren't, You know, they've had fits and starts about maybe we should join, maybe we shouldn't join. It looked like right before the Yoon administration took office that maybe the Moon administration would accelerate China's bid to join TPP, but CPTPP, but that did not happen. And so I think what Korea has learned about CPTPP is that it's not probably as easy to get in had they, as an accession partner versus had they been a founding member. So I think that's one of the reasons that really accelerated and deepened their interest in IPEF at a very early stage. And just to conclude with your question, I think you're getting at kind of RCEP and CPTPP. Neither Korea nor the United States are currently members of CPTPP. I think other CPTPP countries would very much welcome a Korea bid to join. I think there's a feeling that because of KORUS, Korea is in a good position and is, quote unquote, ready to join CPTPP. But, policymakers in Korea have their reservations, including a long concern they've had about if the United States isn't in, and that Japan would call the shots in terms of any accession negotiation. Now, who knows? Maybe the warmer relationships between Japan and Korea could lead to Korea rethinking about applying. But I do feel without the United States in that this policy debate in Korea will continue without any definitive conclusion.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. And now I want to go to Mian, and I want to ask you, Mian, about trade and technology really seem to be elevated in the context of the alliance conversation. We've seen several joint statements that have really fleshed out new forms of cooperation. And I want to ask you, what are the drivers for the Biden administration to kind of elevate trade and technology as components of the alliance relationship, and how do you see them driving alliance cooperation going forward?
Thank you so much, Scott, and I would like to really thank Wilson Center and also CASE for hosting this great event and then to be part of the celebration of the 7 years of the alliance. So I think it works very well after, just speaking after Wendy, because she just provided the bilateral angle. And then I think I probably would be better positioned to, I think I'd like to talk more from a broader perspective. So the economic security nexus, or the economic statecraft that we're talking, and what has motivated the Biden administration to elevate trade and technology a significant component of the US-ROK alliance, or any alliance, as you just mentioned. So I would like to start saying that the economic security nexus is key to understand the evolving concept of the alliance, because technology is a core element, because nowadays I see that each state is shaping the policy choices that sit at the intersection of technology and national security. And the core, the notion of the economic statecraft is very different from the traditional approach, in a sense that the current and new concept is more focused on, in my view, state intervention to influence trade, investment, and industrial policy. So this economic statecraft that we're talking about is an essential component of US-China competition as well in this context. And this is why the innovation in dual-use technology is key to pursue national security. I don't think I have to go to detail because we have other experts who will talk about China, but I just wanted to quickly mention that, as you know, Chinese policies provide a critical example of new economic statecraft as Beijing increasingly uses industrial policy to support and expand industries vital to its national defense innovation system, with the civilian military fusion as a cornerstone of industrial policy. So to enhance innovation in this dual-use technology realm, China has been focusing a lot on the promotion of human capital, technology transfer, and industrial domestic policies toward indigenous innovation at the fore forefront of its policy agenda. For example, the dual circulation strategy. Why? To answer your question, Scott, what has motivated the Biden administration to elevate technology and trade? I think I'd like to share one quote that was offered by Under Secretary of Commerce of Industry and Security, Ellen Estevez. Quote, "We are doing everything in our power to protect our national security and prevent sensitive technologies with military applications from being acquired by PRC's military intelligence and security services." He also said that the threat environment is always changing, and we are updating our policies today to make sure we are addressing the challenges posed by the PRC while we continue our outreach and coordination with allies and partners. I think it really captured the gist of what the current administration has been doing and wants to pursue. So, the spread of this economic statecraft has a profound impact on the global and regional security order as well as the alliance. And it is because it extends to how government link economic externalities with national security objective in both domestic and foreign policy. So this is where I think the countries are facing the dilemma in keeping the balance between domestic politics and policy and foreign policy and domestic policy. So to answer your final question, how do I see them moving forward in terms of the US-ROK alliance? We see, some of the frictions like IRA, but I think I'd like to mention cautiously that we might want to view them as a learning process for a more orchestrated coordination moving forward. There will be moments, of course, where each country should make a choice between domestic politics and foreign policy, because in the end, each country has to make a decision to pursue its own national interest. So before I just close my remarks, I just wanted to highlight two policy recommendations because I was one of the authors from the report that Dr. Terry led, One Agenda to President. So it could be, with using the existing framework like IPEF, like Wendy just mentioned, I think there are stronger demand for collective actions against Chinese economic coercion, and led by the U.S. leadership and with the strong support from the countries like ROK. If there's any protective mechanism within the IPEF, again, or other existing mechanism, of course, this will require clearly crafted roadmap with detailed policy. But for instance, two countries, I hope that these are the ongoing discussions, and they could start with sending a clear public messaging in terms of what they would do with regard to the potential Chinese coercion. So that's one of the policy recommendations that I wrote and I would like to highlight, and I will stop here. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Mi-Yeon. I want to shift to look at the South Korean side of what that looks like, especially in terms of balancing domestic needs and international needs. And also, Mi-Yeon mentioned Chinese coercion, and that I think has been a defining element of the way that South Korea seems to have been navigating the discussion about supply chain resiliency that it's been having with the Biden administration. And so, Won-ho, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about how South Korean government and business are adapting to this emphasis on supply chain resiliency and on the need to shift supply chains, especially given the fact that South Korea has a pretty vibrant bilateral economic relationship with China.
Yeah, so the most significant impact of U.S.-China competition on Korean companies is that business have begun to realize that they cannot tackle the current challenge alone. Everyone actually recognizes the role of government has become important. At the same time, still private companies remain primary actors. The private sector is one who is actually restructuring supply chains also creating new technologies and investing in strategic industries. So as a result, we have reached a moment in which public-private partnership is more crucial than ever. And regarding the supply chain resilience, transition from supply chain efficiency to supply chain resilience and security will inevitably accompany additional costs. Building up like domestic manufacturing facilities or stockpiling inventories and reshoring our factories from foreign location may not necessarily fit naturally well with these profit-maximizing businesses. The question is how and to what extent actually can government intervene. And furthermore, it is also very important to coordinate the answer to this question between the countries, particularly between Korea and the US. And recently, I see there were some differences or friction, as Edward Kagan mentioned. I think economic security should be a condition for economic prosperity, and economic security should not be a means for economic prosperity. So, in other words, if it is about national security, Korea and U.S. are strong allies. So, Korean government is always willing to align our policies with the United States. But if it is about pursuing economic prosperity, then Korea and U.S. are both allies, but also competitors. So our approaches can diverge. So I think, as Edgar Kagan mentioned, like there's a good chemistry. Also, Wendy Cuttle mentioned about these joint meetings, like frequent meetings. So I have no doubt that two governments will close the gap between the two in the near future.
Let me ask you a follow-up about the imperatives of cooperation within the alliance versus the fact that private sector actors are competitors. And how are South Koreans viewing that balance, especially as they appear to be responding to some of the more pressure-oriented aspects of the U.S. effort to try to bring the two governments into alignment and also bring the private sectors into alignment with each other?
So basically, if it is about national security, like for example, like chips export control, then we understand the U.S. concern. So we would like to do our best to align our policies with the United States. But as we have seen from the Inflation Reduction Act, if there's this kind of discriminatory part implemented in the U.S. policies, then that actually affect the private sectors, then the private sectors worry about those kind of policies. And also regarding the CHIPS Act, notice of funding opportunities were released, I think, February 28th. And I heard that from the Department of Commerce that Korean companies didn't actually say any complaint to the U.S. government. But I heard some deep concern from the private sector in Korea. So, yeah.
So how well do you think that the Biden administration is doing in terms of managing the IRA issue in the Korean context?
So from the Korean context, I think IRA, I think the United States government pretty much managed well. So, for example, the clean tech part of this IRA is about I think $390 billion amount of subsidies will be distributed to many areas, and only I think less than 5% actually goes to clean vehicle, and more than 50% actually goes to hydrogen, like nuclear power, also solar panels, wind turbine, and EV batteries. So I think that we see bigger opportunities in Korea.
Okay. I want to come back to some
Okay.
of those other sectors because I think we've been so focused on semiconductors and EVs. But before I do that, I want to go to Young and ask a little bit about the securitization of technology and its impact in terms of China's response. And of course, a lot of this is related to, well, the U.S. has export controls, new export controls on technology to China that I guess South Korean companies have gotten some exceptions on. But you know, the origin of all of this in terms of concern really was China's economic retaliation for THAAD. And so I'm wondering, how do you see China digesting these moves, which are clearly focused on trying to protect and ensure safety of supply chains, but it has adverse impacts on China, and what do you anticipate China might do in response going forward?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me for this excellent conference. But I think after we confirm this Chief-4 alliance, I think Chinese retaliation is possible. However, I see it's a very limited impact because from according to my research, Chinese economic coercion sometimes successful. Like we have some former example from United Kingdom, France, when Dalai Lama visit. But most of the cases, China just threat, but didn't really continue their kind of punitive measure. At the same time, if you think about this Chinese coercive economic statecraft, they have a more short-term kind of. It's good for attaining a short-term kind of interest, like by disturbing some economic damage of the target. But if you look at the long-term perspective, it's more adverse effect on your partner and kind of some target countries. So in that sense, I think Chinese, even though there is Chinese economic retaliation is coming again, but it's the impact will be a little bit limited. At the same time, from my understanding, China is very reluctant, coercive state. So what does mean that like Chinese target sector is very selective. Some kind of sector who has huge economic interest for China, they never select. If you think about South Korea and Taiwan, never target semiconductor industry. At the same time, if you think about South Korea, never target LCD, which is very important for Chinese other advanced technology. So it's very selective target. Like Chinese is kind of decision like will in the end will limit their political influence about changing their policy decision making to align with their more strategic purpose. So in that sense, even though there is retaliation, I think we can get over.
Okay, and I'm going to ask you a follow-up because in the China-Korea economic relationship, Korea has enjoyed over 20 years of surplus until just recently.
Yeah.
It's turned to deficit, and I think a lot of that is related to some of the restrictions that have been imposed as related to semiconductor trade. So what is the impact of that on the Korean view of the relationship with China? And what do you think the prospects are for that bilateral relationship going forward in this new environment?
It's really challenging issue. I also see that like this year, South Korea first is like the largest trade deficit of China, which is it's challenging for Korean businessmen. But as you know, we don't have any option. Like in the long term, Korean chip maker will transfer their factory or manufacturing plant. So the short term, as Dr. Yeol also said, this the economic cost will be inevitable. But in the long term, we're going to move on our supply chain and then probably moderately reduce our reliance on Chinese market and production. So, yeah, that's what I expect.
Okay. Matt, I have actually two questions for you. One is related to the question that I asked Wonho about the issues, the frictions that have developed in the context of implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act. You actually predicted that that might happen in the context of also trying to promote cooperation, technology cooperation within the alliances. But also I know that you've just co-authored a report on anti-coercion strategies that's related to China. And so I actually want to have you address both of those issues.
Okay, thanks, Scott, and thanks to the Wilson Center for including me in a fantastic panel. If you want, you just skip me because you've got plenty of other great insights here and want to hear more from them. I mean, on the first point, I think the worst of the IRA problem is sort of behind us in the sense that, behind the U.S. and Korea in the sense that that was a, it was a big problem for one Korean company. And I think that problem is probably going to be resolved over time. I think the rest of it is actually on net probably not a terrible thing for Korean interests, big picture. But I do think that there's a bigger problem here, which is that the Biden administration has these sort of multiple impulses that I think each one of which is genuine and sort of justifiable. I can think of at least four. One is building back better. I know that term is no longer popular, but sort of you get what I mean. They feel very strongly that we need to rebuild our economy, invest in manufacturing, create jobs at home. That's number one. Number two is addressing climate change. That's a very strong, real impulse. Number three is countering China. Whatever C word you want to use, competing, confronting, challenging, cooperating even, but sort of managing the China problem. And number four is working with allies. So all of those things I think are true, genuine impulses. And in some cases, they run in the same direction. I mean, they broadly all kind of run in the same direction, but there are some tensions, and the IRA was an example of number one and number four kind of coming into a conflict where the U.S. is trying to invest at home, and that they didn't really think through the implications. It sounds like some of the Senate staffers didn't do their job in telling their bosses what the implications would be of some of these measures. Though at the end, I don't think it would have mattered. They still very much wanted this law to pass with the sort of production and jobs it would create at home. But I think that is a tension that still remains and that I think has to be addressed at a higher level. There are tensions between the climate objectives and the China objectives because China has such a dominant position in a lot of the supply of the elements of renewable energy today that are necessary to address that problem. So I think there's still a lot that needs to be discussed and worked out. I'm sure the Biden administration would say these are all good objectives and big picture, it's good for Korea and other allies if the United States is strong, if we're addressing climate change and, by the way, reducing sort of the cost of that challenge, if we're taking on the worst of the China challenge, and we're genuinely working with them in other areas. So I think that's the way they would say they reconcile it, but I think there's still a lot to be worked through here in these areas. On coercion, I mean, we did just do this report, and I'm actually testifying in a couple of hours in the House because of that report. It's a hearing on trade, but they noticed that one of the things we called for in our report was negotiating for the United States to negotiate more free trade agreements to give our partners and allies alternatives to the China dependencies that they have, which would sort of make them more resilient and less vulnerable to Chinese coercion. So that's one of the big conclusions of our report that countries, including Korea and the United States, have dependencies on China. And those are creating opportunities for China to use this leverage of their large market, and we need to find a way to deter China from using that. But we came down at the end of the day in this report, and we did go back, and I haven't read this since graduate school, but we went back and read sort of deterrence theory and game theory and things, and we kind of saw that there are two ways to deter people. One is to make them think you're going to punish them, and the other is to make them think they're going to fail. And we looked at the punishment side of it, and we just didn't it's very tempting to go down that road, but we just felt that that wasn't going to realistically change China's behavior. And if the more we escalate to get their attention, the less credible our action becomes. And our partners don't want it. I mean, we heard from all of the 8 country representatives that we studied that partners are very reluctant to have the U.S. retaliate on their behalf, because as soon as the good kid leaves the playground, and having put the bully in his place, the bully starts picking on the kid that's vulnerable again, and so that led us towards deterrence by failure, or by denying China what it wants to get, and that leads you to sort of resilience, relief to your partners, to reassure them that you're there. And we have to credibly do those things. If we don't do those things, as we didn't in the case of THAAD, we didn't say anything, and that was, we heard a lot of that from Korea. But if the U.S. were to stand up and say something, and to do things like provide relief and help with resilience, then we think that would be a credible response to this problem, which, however, is still going to continue, because the bully's going to be a bully. And so we have to be realistic about what's going to happen here. I just want to, I know you have other things to talk about, and I've talked a lot, but I do want to just sort of, in a way, pick up on what Wendy said about our bilateral economic relationship is just transformed from when she was so bravely trying to solve some of these trade problems, and then multiple times had to negotiate agreements to deal with them. It's just hard to believe how much stronger our bilateral relationship is. And to me, it's sort of her last point about, I think the real opportunity for the U.S. and Korea are actually in third places. It's not so much the bilateral, there's a lot still to talk about and manage, but it's really the opportunity now is for the U.S. and Korea to come together with our shared economic capabilities, with our shared values and interests, to sort of push out our preferred rules and norms of economic behavior in the region and beyond. And that's where I think we should be doing more things together, like regional trade agreements or digital trade agreements and so forth. There's a lot for the U.S. and Korea to do together.
Well, that's actually exactly where I wanted to go next, because this morning we heard Edgar Kagan say that there's almost no issue on the global agenda where Korea is not there as a partner, and he actually used the phrase South Korea as a technology superpower. And so I am interested in, what does that mean in practical terms, in terms of U.S.-Korean engagement on global economic policy issues, because we know there's so many different forums where that happens. And so I do want to dig into that. I'm going to ask Wendy to address that, but before I do, I just want to get Yoo-Kyung to respond to what Matt laid out, because there obviously were failed expectations. We failed to meet expectations in terms of the THAAD response. And I'm curious to know what the South Korean expectations are as related to the possibility of Chinese economic retaliation in the current environment.
So you mean the future technology alliance, or how Chinese responded?
Well, no, I'm actually just, if China decides to use economic retaliation in the context of the increased restrictions on export controls and all those sorts of issues, what do the South Korea expect from the United States at this stage?
That's really the question I was looking forward. So basically, I think Korea was very excited about last year, maybe Biden, as you mentioned, proposed the Indo-Pacific economic framework. So we had a big interest in, because as Wendy also talked about it, because they may allow Korea act collectively against any kind of Chinese future potential retaliation measure. So alone it's difficult, because given our reliance on export and a lot of some intermediate good export to import. But however, if Indo-Pacific economic framework is advanced as more institutional kind of setup for collective action, that may really, I think that may enhance our technological alliance with partner, because we have made kind of backup plan. So I think this is very important. I think it's issue, and I hope we can South Korea and China, South Korea and United States, the policymaker, have a real talk about this, how can we improve this Indo-Pacific economic framework to deal with this potential threat in practice.
Okay. So Wendy, how do we interact with South Korea on the global economic policy agenda, and what are the areas of potential for further development?
So I want to follow on a theme that touches both on economic coercion and the IRA, and that is that when governments act and do things, other governments remember them, and they're in the back of their mind. So in some ways, yes, maybe with respect to the IRA and the one company in Korea that had enormous challenges, some kind of accommodation was reached through allowing lease cars to avail themselves to electric vehicle subsidies. But I would just argue that I think it's going to take a while for our trading partners to kind of work through the IRA implications. In some ways, I think a lot of our partners overreacted because I think we're entering into a new world, and I think many of our trading partners, including, I will say, one of my first trips to Korea, all anyone wanted to talk to me about was, this tax credit at the expense of like a lot of other bigger issues. So I get all that. But I also think I do think that going forward, when Korean policymakers make decisions, this is going to be in the back of their mind. And I'd want to also say the same thing on economic coercion, that the THAAD retaliation for the most part has been taken off now by China. But I would argue the next time Korea is asked or wants to do something vis-a-vis China, that one of their policy considerations will be possible retaliation by China. Now, they may say, you know what, we're willing to do this anyway because we can act collectively with a whole group of countries. So they may come out in the same place. But again, I think this becomes part of policy-making considerations. And I think in both areas, there's like a common theme here, that governments do remember this stuff, and they'll want to sort through it the next time they have to make a decision. Just, briefly with respect to like our agenda with Korea going forward, and a lot of these economic security issues, particularly like the supply chain ones, for me, like there's a lot of coordination going on and a lot of process stuff going on. But countries, as far as I can tell, or governments or the companies with the government backing, have been somewhat reluctant to kind of go to the next step, which is really pooling capabilities and saying, you're in charge of this part of the supply chain, we'll do this part, we'll supply this. But really, supply chain integration, agreeing to the same standards for the products, getting rid of tariffs, really making it kind of like free trade and diversification to its like ultimate level. And so I think that leap hasn't really been made, but I wonder if U.S. and Korea together could start making that leap and bringing other, relevant countries on board as well. Again, my concern is we have enough fora to discuss all of these issues with Korea bilaterally, in groupings, in APEC, in WTO, wherever. It's not the lack of a forum for discussions. It's like, what are we doing? What's the next step? We can do a lot of this process stuff, consulting, but when it comes to these economic security issues, are we really willing to and ready to take a next step when we're really integrating our economies further and relying on each other in times of crisis to help out? And I think there, like, a lot more work needs to be done, but I think that's the direction the world needs to be going, and I think the United States and Korea are well positioned to help that movement.
Mian, did you have something?
So just quickly follow up on what Wendy just mentioned. So I think it is clear. It is clear for other states what U.S. has been doing. U.S. government has been doing in terms of using economic instruments to safeguard its national interest and economic competitiveness. I think it's also very important at the same time for the U.S. government to demonstrate how these economic measures can safeguard the national interests of other countries, allies, and partners. I just wanted to say that. And then on your question on global, effort, what ROK in the United States could do more. So there are a lot of multilateral, multilateral effort, and I think we can amplify and strengthen the existing ones, and also creating new ones as well. But for instance, TSMC's, building more, plants in Japan, and also Hyundai Motors is working on, cooperation with the Australian mining company. I think those are the line of effort that are very aligned with what we're actually expecting. And also using the current US-Japan ROK trilateral framework, would be a very useful tool. And maybe since South Korea has this institutional knowledge from the Chinese coercion, in terms of the Fed deployment, so it's just not economic viable to rely too much on a single country. So with using this trilateral framework, maybe they can expand to just in terms of the China Plus strategy, and then linking more with ASEAN countries like Vietnam and Indonesia, and also in the areas of other areas of cooperation. I think cybersecurity. Last year, I think according to The Economist, North Korea stole I think $1.7 billion from the cryptocurrency. So this is where the two countries can work more. And also, I don't think we hear a lot on the critical minerals partnership, but I think that's also where we can do more activities.
Okay. We're running low on time, but I do want to both ask Wonho how Korean private sector is responding to this concept of supply chain integration, and also ask him to elaborate a little bit more about what are the other areas where there is a lot of potential. You mentioned a few in terms of additional technology cooperation, but I'd be particularly interested in your further elaboration on areas, especially where governments would be in a position to frame that cooperation in ways similar to what we've seen on the semiconductor front and on batteries.
Yeah, it's quite a difficult question, but I think the key areas of economic security can be summarized as supply chain, advanced tax, and cybersecurity, actually. And still, I think the Korean government approaches cybersecurity as from the defense perspective, but I think cybersecurity is also a key element of economic security. And I think from the first session, one of the reporters actually asked about the cybersecurity cooperation between the two governments. And I think this cybersecurity, like for example, including tax, is the easiest one to have a cooperation between the two governments, because we, I think, share the goal and the threat perception together. So we can work together closely. Also, Korea, we now trying to think big. We began to think about expanding the list of our partners. So still the US is the core, but we these days talk more with the UK, also Canada, Australia. So these kind of bilateral talks with these Five Eyes, countries, interestingly. And in terms of advanced tech, we already included many sectors in our joint statement in 2021, 2022, like advanced semiconductor, ICT, also batteries. But I think I would expect to have more interesting cooperation in aerospace and nuclear energy. Actually, Korea, we depend on nuclear energy, about like 30% of our total electricity. and our dependency on Russia is almost reaching 50% on the enriched uranium, the raw materials for the nuclear power plants. So probably I think I would see more cooperation in solving this issue, maybe diversifying or more cooperation between the U.S. and Korea to solve this issue. Yeah, so that's an advanced tech issue. And the firms, right? It's very difficult. So when I talk to private companies, they really see they cannot overcome the situation with their own. So they are willing to talk more with the government, and they want government to actually solve this issue with other governments. But basically, we are exposed to the investment prohibition from the United States, more export controls, against China. But China is also pressuring Korean companies to invest more in China. So we are kind of facing the dilemma. So we need to do more in the government.
Okay, any urgent last comments I'm going to open it up for questions, but I want to just give our other panelists a chance to weigh in on any issue they want while we see if anybody has, we can take some questions, right? If we can come right down here.
Is there a mic? Yes, there's a mic for you. Please wait for it.
And I'm just relying on our organizers to tell me when to stop letting people ask questions.
Hi, my name's Dana. I'm from the DoD. Thank you so much for the discussion today. I'd like to attempt to thread the needle a little bit between the discussion that we're having in this panel and the prior panel. So my question for you is, do you see Russia's invasion of Ukraine having an impact on its economic cooperation with countries in the Indo-Pacific? And do you see opportunities for the US-ROK alliance to capitalize on this?
Any volunteers? That's an interesting question.
So the Russian invasion of Ukraine having an impact on Russia's engagement with Indo-Pacific countries, and whether that opens up an opportunity? Yeah, I mean, sure. I think clearly, a lot of things are going through my head. Partly, Russia's never been quite as sort of active or successful, certainly in its Far East strategies as it sort of lays out in its ambition, or when it was sort of more a normal country. And so they had a lot of work to do, even when they were, not invading other countries out there in the Far East. And so, but obviously I think this is probably, I assume this has been a huge setback to any efforts they have out in the region, and particularly, that the apart from the, all the other reasons this is problematic, it's really disrupted energy markets, and that's got to be, a problem for a lot of Indo-Pacific, partners or potential partners out there. I think certainly, I guess I just go back to, I still don't see Russia as having ever punched even close to its weight out in the Far East, and so there was always an opportunity for us the U.S. and Korea to do more out there in the region willy-nilly, and this is, I think, very severely damaged their position. So there's lots more opportunity, but I haven't thought a lot about that, as you can tell.
So one question I would ask is whether Russia's involvement in the civilian nuclear energy sector could be impacted, because I think that Russia is a supplier of plants to Vietnam. But I don't know what Vietnam's plans are in terms of building any new nuclear.
Nor do I.
So, okay, we'll go to the very back.
Thank you. Rob Colorina, AIAC Investments. I think in Wendy's comments, you referred to ESG and some of these areas of sustainability. I would welcome any panelist input. Is that strategy driven on policy, or is that as much on economic hedging?
Sounds like that's directed to you, Wendy.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay, could you repeat that?
Yeah, it was respect to ESG. I think there was reference to climate change and sustainability. So whether this is as much on government policy to match some of the other regional or Western economies, or as much on economic hedging, business interests of growing alpha on investments.
Nobody actually directly mentioned ESG. I do believe that the climate objective was mentioned by Matt.
Yeah, I mean, look, the United States and Korea, we share, for a long time have shared a lot in the environmental space, a lot of the same objectives, the same visions, and I think particularly with respect to the development of clean technologies, there's a lot of work we can be doing and we are doing with Korea, but we could really be stepping up this work. So I think that's going to be a very important component to our economic and overall relationship going forward.
Okay, there's another question at the very back.
Hi, thank you. My name is Sam Kim. I'm a Bloomberg News reporter. Thank you today for sharing your thoughts and insights. I've got a question about trade. I've been noticing in recent months that the U.S. is starting to buy a lot more than it used to from South Korea, whereas exports to China from South Korea are continuing to fall. And I think this year it's quite likely that the U.S. is going to be the biggest buyer of Korean exports. Very possibly. How would you interpret this changing trade relations in terms of numbers? And another question I have is, so there's a bit of unease among, not just in Korea, but also in other parts of the world, about the U.S. efforts to sort of realign the global supply chains, as part of its efforts to counter China's influence. How would you address that? Yeah, thank you.
Just briefly, just for the first question. So in 2013, Korea's FDI toward China and FDI toward the U.S. was almost same amount, like $50 billion. But since 2013, our FDI toward China has stagnated, but our FDI toward U.S. Dramatically increased. So last year we invested 4 times bigger than we invest in China. We invest in the United States was 4 times bigger than we invest in China. And usually in economics, the trade is followed by the investment. So I think that's one part of one answer to your question. I think.
Any other comments? Any other questions from audience? Going once, going twice.
I can answer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just answered the supply chains. So there is some Chinese saying like the crisis in Chinese like Ji-Wei, it's opportunity also challenge. So I think this supply chains, this resilience is. It's challenging, but in the long term, we can really reduce the heavy reliance on China, the mineral research and everything. So as Japan has done, about what the rare earths like now is after China, it's second is the top producer is Japan. So I think this is we need to have a more positive attitude to make how to best use of this challenge, making an opportunity for the more resilient supply chain, because China is going to continue to be threat to Korean economy.
Okay, I'm going to have a follow-up on that because, having said that, I think that the Chinese are probably going to be eager to try to recover some aspects of the bilateral trade relationship, and my sense is that they are looking for new opportunities with South Korea. And so I'm wondering, in a context where South Korea is clearly more sharply identifying China as a threat, what are the economic areas where that might actually have a chance in the China-Korea bilateral trade relationship?
So because the China-Korea trade relationship is now more low end, because we competing each other. We both export like high advanced technology, particularly in Southeast Asia, China, Korea. It really competition. So in that sense, its trade structure is now transforming.
Yeah.
So so we need more new strategy too.
And I would just add, I mean, I think all of these trade flows, things are really transforming.
Yes.
When you look at, a lot of traditional trading partners, how things have moved, or, if we're buying less from China, then it turns out we're buying more from Asia. So in some of this, we're just kind of rearranging chairs. In other areas, the trade flows are being affected by geopolitical preferences and geopolitical tensions. And so I think you're going to see trade between the U.S. and Korea continue to increase. And I think, my view is last year, 2022, was a banner year in terms of U.S.-China trade at about $700 billion in trade in goods. My view is it's probably a peak year, and that we may see, those trade flows decreasing over time. I mean, for years, when I was working with Korea, the Koreans were so proud that they had a surplus with China and used to rub it in all the time. And, that's changing now. And is that really transitional? I don't think so. I think things are happening and I think one of the areas are, as China gets more into advanced technologies, then their demand for Korean inputs and Korean technologies, can go down as well. So there's a lot of ways to read into these trade flows, but I just think that we're going to be seeing some real profound changes over time.
Okay, we're going to take one last question, if there is one. Okay, yeah, right there.
Thank you. My name is Christina from Beacon Global Strategies. We're seeing sort of a global contagion of tech policy targeting kind of companies operating abroad, specifically on cloud security, network usage fees, and I'm sure this is something that will be discussed more broadly down the line. But I'm curious to know what are some ways that the U.S. and South Korea can both work together to enhance cooperation in bilateral tech policy specifically? And do you think this will be something that will be addressed next week?
Okay, it's up for grabs. I'm going to ask Matt.
I mean, there's a lot of scope. I think I'm not an expert in cloud computing and don't know the specifics of what the opportunities or challenges are there, but I would say in general that the U.S. and Korea has such great, complementary capabilities in technology that there have got to be enormous opportunities for us to work together on actual in the market, to promote, innovation, R&D in new technologies, and to work in the policy area to try to create an environment that is more favorable to, those technological solutions and services. And I think, we are doing a lot of that already. I assume it is going to be talked about, and I think it'll be expanded. I think this kind of cooperation, there are lots of reasons that we ought to be doing more together on the promotion side of new technologies and new opportunities, as well as on the protection side, which we tend to focus on in these conversations about how to protect ourselves against risk, which is fair enough, but we also have a lot to do to promote new opportunities in areas like that, and I think there's certainly that's going to be talked about.
Okay, well, I hope that we have offset the level of pessimism that existed in the first panel. I think that we have. This exceeded my expectations. I want to ask everyone to please join me in thanking our panelists for a great discussion.
Okay.
Now I remember.
Thank you so much. So on behalf of the Wilson Center and our co-host, the Korean Association of International Studies, I would like to thank all the panelists, panel 1, panel 2, and to all of you for coming and for everyone who's joining us online and watching. But before I conclude, I would like to thank, of course, KAI's president, Park In-hui, but in particular, Dr. Kim Min-sung, who worked tirelessly to make this event successful. Many morning and night calls because of Seoul and Washington time difference. I really also want to thank our Korea Center colleagues, our program associate Kayla Ulta, she's standing right there, for making this possible, and as well as our team. We have, there of course behind the scenes, but Tiffany and Angie and Jason and Claire and SJ. And particular thanks to the event team and the AV team who's making this possible. And so this concludes the 2023 US-ROK Forum, 70 years of the US-ROK Alliance, past and the future. Thank you.
Thank you.